Hi everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. If you've had a Dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. For all of you who celebrate Thanksgiving, I hope you had a great one. Well, it's been an interesting week to say the least. I had 3 eyewitnesses lined up to interview separately for tonight's show, and one by one they all had to cancel due to health-related issues. There were other eyewitnesses I could have contacted about coming on tonight's show, but since I've been feeling lousy all week myself, I decided, you know what? I'm just going to air a Scariest Encounters episode. So tonight's show's going to be almost 4 hours of Scariest Encounters from episode 156 forward. Before we get into that first encounter, I wanted to let you know a lot of fans of the show have been asking for t-shirts with the new Dogman Encounters logo on them. It shouldn't be too long before I've got them available in the Dogman Encounters store. As soon as they're available, I'll be sure to let you know. To visit the Dogman Encounters store, please go to dogmanencounters.com/store. Tonight's first encounter is from episode 156, Buster.
Me and my family got there Friday night. We was all at the boat slip. And the one thing about these boat slips, it's not just like regular boat slips where you park your boat and everything like that. The thing about these boat slips, a lot of people, they hang out and everything like that because these boat slips, once you park your boat, there's this area. It's like an 18 by 18, 20 by 20 or something like that. And these people are the owners of these boat slips. I say a boat slip, but it's more like an outdoor patio. People put furniture out there. There's cabinets out there. There's grills and everything like that. So people can just pretty much hang out there all day. So we were out there and we were talking about going jugging. It's something that we've done in the past. Cool thing about jugging, it's just a real fast and easy, efficient way to catch catfish. And basically what jugging is, for those people that don't know, you get a milk jug or an empty bleach bottle or something like that with like a 20, 30-foot fishing line on it, with the weight on the bottom, and basically just go out in the middle of the lake, set the hooks with shad or whatever bait you want to put for it to have, and throw it out there, and you leave it out there for 4 or 5 hours, and you come back, and usually there's lots of fish on there. We've done that before, and, we've caught 30, 40, 50-pound catfish. Well, we was getting everything ready, and I was telling Bubba, I'm like, why don't we try setting limb lines this time? And the reason we haven't done that before in the past is because the boat that my brother has, it's a big boat. And the place where we wanted to set the limb lines, it was in the river. And the thing about his boat, we couldn't put it out there because it would probably get stuck. There's lots of shallow parts and everything like that. Well, we had a deer lease, and the deer lease that we had a, I don't know, it's like probably a 13, 14-foot John boat. And we had it out there because there was probably about a 5-6 acre lake that we would duck hunt. And there was a place we had to go on that lake that had a duck blind. And the only way we could get there was with the John boat. So we got off that deer lease this year. So my brother had to put the John boat at the lake. So as we're doing the jug lines and everything like that, I'm like, hey, Bubba, we got this John boat. Why don't we try setting some limb lines out? He's like, yeah, that's cool. That sounds like fun. So that was Friday night. So the next day, Saturday, we go out. Kids are fishing. We're hanging out at the lake, basically what we always do. Then we decided to go set the jugs out. We set the jugs out. We probably set 10, 11, 12, something like that. And then we go and we head to the Red River. Now, while we're going in the Red River, it's our first time there. And we all thought it looked pretty cool because there was all these oak trees and all these tree branches and everything like that. And they're just going over the river, which we thought was pretty nice because at the time it was probably 97, probably 100 degrees or something like that. And it was real hot. And the trees that was going over the river, it made a nice shade for us. Well, first, let me back up a little bit. We knew that we were going to be setting the jugs at night. So when we set these jug lines, we got this reflective tape and we wrapped it all around the jugs. That way at night, while we were going, we would shine a spotlight and we would see the reflection from the jug, and it'd be easier for us to see. So while we're getting to the river, we say, it would probably make sense because we're probably going to be coming here at night. So instead of getting a spotlight and shining to the left and shining to the right, let's just put all the limb lines on one side. And basically what limb lines is, so you have these small branches going over the river, right? So it's basically just getting a string, tying a hook on it, and it dangles in the water 4 or 5 feet. And when a big fish gets on it or something like that, that limb acts like a fishing pole. So when it goes down on it, that limb line goes up and it sets the hook. We come back in a couple hours, boom, we got a fish. So we decided to put it on the right side of the deal. That way, while we're shining the spotlight, we didn't have to go back to the left and right. We could just shine it on the right side of the bank. It'd be easier for us to find. So after we set those, we also put reflective tape around the branches. So we did that. We put about 10 out. That took us a little while. We hung out, did some other stuff. We trolled, tried to catch some sand bass, everything like that. Didn't have much luck. Then we went back to the dock, ate dinner, hung out. The kids did some more fishing, swimming, all that good stuff. So it was probably about 9:45, 10, I want to say. All the kids went to bed. The jugs have been out there for a while. Let's go check them. The limb line's been out there for a while. Let's go see what we got. Let me back up because I just remembered something else. So we weren't at my brother's big boat. We were in his John boat, which is, like I said, it's a 12, 14, 15 foot or something like that. And it has a 25 horsepower pull start. It's like either a Johnson or an Eberhard. And while he was starting it, while we were leaving the deal, it took him about 20, 30 pulls. I didn't think we were going to get it started because we had it at the deer lease for all these years and we didn't use it that much, and it got rained on in the weather and everything like that. I thought the gas lines maybe have jumped up. I thought it didn't work. But finally, after about 25, 30 pulls, something like that, he finally got it started. And I remember one time I got upset with him, with Bubba, because while we were setting the jug lines, well, I didn't get upset with him. I guess I got upset with the situation because the jug line was going back towards the engine, towards the propeller, and it was going to get stuck. So he had to shut the motor off, or the string from the jug line would get all tangled up. And then again, it probably took us another 25, 30 pulls to get it started. So that was kind of important because what's going to happen later. I just thought I would tell you that. So anyway, it's probably about 9:45, 10 o'clock. It might be a little bit later. I don't know. We go out, we check the jugs. I think we caught one that was decent size. We caught some other small ones, nothing to really brag about. There was probably a couple that was pretty good. And then we start heading towards the river. So again, we're going to the Red River. We have the spotlight shining. We have that full tape, which when we shine it, it makes it really, really easy to see because it reflects back and everything like that. That's the reason why we did it. So we're shining on the right side. We probably go about 4 or 5 limb lines. I don't think we caught anything. Well, we get to like the 5th or the 6th one, and we start hearing like some commotion or something pushing the trees or something like that. And what's going through my mind, you know, like I was saying earlier, that there's tons of deer out there, tons of hogs, turkeys, and everything like that. And usually around this time of year in Texas, it may be in a month or two, it may have been last month, but all I know it's in the summer. These white-tailed deer, they have these velvet on their antlers, and what they'll do, they'll go up to these trees, and they'll just like, you know, just scratch their velvet up and down to try to get that velvet off. And that's what was going through my mind. I thought it was either some kind of deer, some kind of pig, or something like that, because you could almost hear like a low, low growl, like a low snort, and it's like trees going and everything like that. Well, as soon as we hear that, my brother shuts off the engine. I don't know why he did that, but we're on the right side of the bank, and we're probably about, I don't know, 25, 30 yards from where we're hearing the sound. And we stayed there for about 10, 15 seconds just so we could hear what was going on and everything like that. And like I said, my brother had the engine off. So then all of a sudden there's a big branch that's overhanging us. So Bubba, he gets this branch and he starts kind of like just getting his arms and kind of pushing us so we can get some momentum so we can go on to the left side of the bank. So what we wanted to do, we wanted to get to the left side of the bank, hang on to a tree over there so Danny could shine his light and see just what this thing was. You know, we thought, like I was saying, we thought it was a pig or something like that. So while we're while we're drifting back to the left side of the bank, we're probably halfway through, and then all of a sudden we hear a crash and something just tossed at us. I don't know if it was tossed. I don't know if it was rolled. or dropped, but it wasn't, something it came close to hitting the right side of our boat, and it just made a huge splash. We all three almost fell off the boat, and this just wasn't a normal sized rock. It was like just picture like a F-250 just barreling down the hill at like 60 miles an hour, jumping the bank, going up about 10 foot, and just crashing down right next to our boat. That's like, to me, that's what it sounded like. That's what the momentum had. Well, the force from it almost knocked us off the boat. So Danny had the spotlight, right? And the spotlight it was a spotlight we used to have at our deer lease. It was the one that you just plug into the ashtray. But we knew that there wasn't, in that little John boat we had, we knew that there wasn't, a place to put like a cigar lighter or something like that. So we just kind of converted it to one that had clips on it so you could put on a battery terminal. So there was just these small clips on a battery terminal or post or whatever you want to call them. Well, when that rock or tree or freaking truck or whatever the heck it was went down and almost knocked us off, I think Danny got off balance or something like that, and it ripped the clips off the post. So at this point, we weren't seeing anything. Well, about this time, and just the force from it just like made us just like sail towards the left side of the bank. All right. So once we got on the left side of the bank, my brother kind of gets the deal, and he's kind of, securing us. And that's when we see it. Me and brother, we both look at where the sound was coming from, and it was on all fours, and it was walking probably like 10, 12 foot, something like that. And I just remember it wasn't, as soon as I saw it, I'm like, okay, this isn't a dog. This isn't a mountain lion. This has to be, it probably has to be like a 15 and 2,000 pound pig or something like that. That was the only thing going through my mind. How far it was up, like picture like a grown man getting on all fours, and then just like another grown man getting on him. That's how high, he was on all fours, but that's how tall it was, whatever that is. 5 foot, 5.5, 6 foot, something like that. And I just remember it just kept walking back and forth. And the only thing I was thinking in my mind is like a tiger or a lion, just like locked up, like when you see them at the zoo, and they're just like walking back and forth, and they're just like looking at you, just like pacing the cage. That's what this thing was doing, man. Just walking back and forth. Like I said, it was going like 10, 12 foot one way, and it was dark, but I couldn't see it. But in my mind, it was like he didn't take his head off of us. He didn't take his eyes off of us. Like he kept his head and his eyes on us the whole time. And as he would turn, his body would turn, but his head and his eyes would stay exactly on us. And he would just walk back and forth and stuff like that, like he was trying to figure out what he was going to do or how he was going to kill us or something like that. Well, okay, so early in the day, Danny, I remember he had this cigarette lighter, and he was getting mad because it got wet or something like that, and he was trying to light a cigarette, and it took him like 7 or 8 times to light it or something like that. So me and Bubba, we're looking at this thing, and we're not looking at each other. We're not seeing anything. I couldn't breathe. It was one of those feelings you're like, this is something that probably no other human being has ever seen before in their life. I'm probably the only person that has seen something like this before. So while we're doing that, Danny, like I said, he had the spotlight, and he was trying to, I guess, I really don't know what he was doing, but he was trying to light where the bottom of the boat was, where the transom or something like that, where the battery was, so he could find out where, the clips were on and everything like that on the battery, so he could shine the spotlight in the direction where we was looking. So I just remember he was like cussing and talking loud and stuff like that. And me and Bubba was both so scared we couldn't talk, and I couldn't tell him to shut up or anything like that. I just remember on the left side of the boat was my brother. I was in the middle, and Danny was by the motor. And I just remember I got my right hand, and I just got down the shirt and kind of pulled it like I was telling him to be quiet or something like that. But it didn't do no good because he kept on going with what he was doing. Well, and this probably took, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 seconds, this whole thing. And finally, he gets it working and everything like that, and he's laughing, and he's like, yeah, I got it. And we're like, and I'm pushing him again to be quiet and everything like that. And he looks at us, and we didn't even have to tell him where to shine the light because he knew. where our eyes were exactly looking, that something was out there. So he shined it on there. And, through this whole experience, Vic, of what I'm about to tell you about how it was doing this and how it was doing that, the thing that freaked me out the most, the thing that I hear in my dreams, I hear in my nightmares, and I hear while just, awake, is the sound it made. So let's say you had 3 or 4 of those tractor tires lined up, okay? And then you got like this big knife, and you laid these tires up, one right here, one right here, one right here, one right here, left and right. And then you got this knife, and you just stabbed it in that tire. It would probably make a sound, like a big, long hissing sound, like that, right? Well, think of that sound. All right, so just picture you getting a knife and getting that tire, and boom, just hitting that tire, and so the air can come out. And as soon as you hit that one, you hit the other one. Then as soon as you hit the other one, you hit the other one. So there was a sound, like I was saying, of 3 or 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, like of like sound is being shot out of like a tank or a tire or something like that. So we started hearing. So the whole time Danny had his light on it. So we heard that, and that's when he started getting up. And then it was like bones were just cracking. Like the only way I can describe it, like, there's like those big tractors, or I don't know, they're not tractors, but they're like that equipment that like road construction crews, like when the concrete's wet, they have like that big rolly thing, and they just roll it along like the wet concrete. Just like picture, there's all these bags of like thousands of bones, and this huge heavy machinery is just going over it, and all you can hear is just crack, crack, crack. That's what it sounded like. So it was just, while he was standing up, the first thing you heard was all this air going out, and then just bones cracking like it was robotic, or I don't know. I can't describe it. It was just the thought, and it was loud too. It was like tree branches were breaking, but it was, you could tell it was coming from whatever that creature was. His bones were like sipping into place or something like that. So as soon as that happened, Danny had the light on the thing, and this thing had like when people say it was 12 foot tall, I really don't know how they can tell that unless they go back the next day and there's some kind of point of, a reference where they bring a tape measure or something like that. All I know, it was over 10 foot tall. It had to have been. It could have been 12, 13, 14 foot tall. It was massive. So Danny shines the light on it, and the first thing you see is like these yellow orangish eyes. But at this point, he's not looking at it. He has his head up in the air, like to the right, and it's like he's like snapping at something. Like just picture like if a bee was going by him or something like that, and he was trying to catch it in his teeth. That's exactly what he was doing, and you could hear just crash of his teeth, just crashing. And I remember he had these big, broad shoulders, and he was like panting, like not panting, but like breathing. His chest would go up, and his shoulders would rise up, and it would go back down, and then you could see it again. His shoulders would go up, and his chest would go out, just taking deep breaths, and then he looked at us, and I still remember. Okay. Like, like when a dog gets done eating or something like that, and there's like food on the side of their teeth, and I don't know what they call it, licking their chops or something like that. But it's like he looked at us, and he was still breathing. And if I just go back to the breathing too, like when the only thing I can think of is breathing like picture like these big giant, like 6'6", they're all decked out. They have muscles and everything like that. Like, right before they go into like a cage fight of MMA or something like that. And they're trying to get themselves like pissed or pumped up just so they can just like beat whoever they're about to fight. And they're breathing and everything like that, just walking around the cage like no one can stop them. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of like how I like pictured this thing, just like the breathing and everything. So anyway, he's looking at us. His teeth are, like I said, trying to bite just like in the air, and it was like had his nose up trying to smell something. I still remember what his ears were real pointed like a. His ears didn't look. My brother has a lab. He has a silver lab. His name's Bo. It wasn't because those ears fall down. It wasn't ears like that. These ears were like pointed straight up, and I can still remember on each ear there was like 2 or 3 strands. For some reason, I still remember that there was 2 or 3 strands of like this off hair that was like going off his ears or something like that. But all right, so he looks at us, and like I was saying, like when dogs get done eating or something like that, and they have food on the left or right side of their face or something like that. I think it's called licking their chops or something. But it's like he did that. His top lip like snarled up, and then I actually just saw he had this long tongue like a dog, and it just licked the left side of his face, and it licked the right side of his face. And I remember he had hair all over his body. I don't know what color it was. I don't know if it was red. I don't know if it was dark brown. I'm assuming it was blackish. I still remember that he had like where his stomach was. It's like I could see like muscles, like a 6-pack, and it was black. And his hands, they looked like human hands. I don't know what color his hands were or anything like that. Like I said, I was probably 30 yards away because that's how far the banks was. But I think since we got so a good picture of what it looked like and everything like that, and I can't say for sure, but I'm thinking what had happened after we saw it. I think my brother let go of it, and he can't remember because I asked him. But I think what had happened after he let go of that tree branch, I think we started floating closer towards where he was. Because like I said, when we had the spotlight, when Danny had that spotlight, I saw every bit of it. So his hands, they looked like human hands. They weren't like a dog. They weren't paws or anything like that. They were human hands, and there was, I don't know how long they were, 1.5 to 2. I don't know, but I could tell they were sharp, and he was just kind of like rocking back and forth, and he had his head going up and down, and he was just panting, and I could see his nose. He looked like a dog. His face looked kind of like a German Shepherd a little bit. His snout didn't go out far. It wasn't far out like a crocodile or anything like that, but it didn't go in as much as a regular canine did, as a regular German Shepherd. It went out a little bit. So we're looking at it, and no one's really saying anything. And the only thing I'm thinking of, I'm like, you know what? This is it. We're dead. Just how massive this thing is, just how pissed off this thing. I mean, it looked mad, like it was mad. I don't know if we got into his space while he was eating, or if we got close to his home, but it looked like he was mad. It's like he wanted just how this thing was. He could rip all of our arms off, our legs off, everything, and just like he wanted to just take us to hell with them and take our souls. That's kind of what I was thinking. I know that kind of seemed out there, but when you see something like this, something that's not supposed to exist, that's what's going to go through your mind. So about this time, me and Danny here, Bubba trying to start the motor, and the only thing I'm thinking, I'm like, oh crap, because early in the day, like I said, it took him 25, 30 times to start it. And then while we was out jugging, when that line almost got caught up in the propeller, it probably took him another 25, 30 times to start it too. And I'm like, there's no way we're getting out of here. Well, by the grace of God or whoever, that second time Bubba lifts pulls on the motor, it starts. And I just remember Danny, he screamed as loud as he could, get us the hell out of here. So, and like I said, this is only a 12, 13-foot John boat. It's a 20, 25, I don't know exactly what it is, but it's a small 20, 25 horsepower Johnson Everroot or something like that. So we start going, and we start picking up some speed and everything like that. And then, so the next thing we knew, and like I said, so we're going, and he's on the left side right now because we was turning around the other way and we was on the right side, but now he's on the left side. And then all we could hear was just tree branches going like there was 3 or 4 big giant John Deere tractors, man, just in a row, just knocking trees down, just making a ruckus. That's all we could hear. So Bubba's going, But at the same time, I'm looking back because I don't know what's going on. And Danny has this spotlight, and he's shining it in the air, and he's shining it on where all this commotion is going on and everything like that. And we see it. And, you know, I told you this before, but the thing that creeped me out, well, one of the many things that creeped me out about this was just how fast this thing was. It was almost like it wasn't just like you could see it like dark, like all right. So like picture it's in the space, like in a certain spot, and then it would run, and then you would like shine the light, and you're like, I didn't even see it run. How the did it get there so fast? Like it was almost like fake or like cartoonish. So anyway, we're going, and in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, all right, so where we are right now to where the main part of the big lake, the main part of Lake Tacoma is, that's probably a 2.5, 3 minute boat ride. This little old boat, this little old motor we got. So we're going. Bubba, I don't even think he's looking back. He's just trying to get us out of there. There was actually I didn't think about it until we was talking about this today. I just now remember it today. We actually had like this big ice chest that we had like Cokes in and like, and like some of the fish we caught and everything like that. And I remember Bubba threw that overboard. So I don't know if he thought it was less weight or something like that. But, you know, I just remember we were talking about that today. But anyway, so we were going, and Danny shining the spotlight, and like I said, I hear those trees crash and everything like that. And that's when you see it run, and then it just jumps. And I remember Danny was tried his best to follow it. You couldn't follow it because it jumped so fast. It jumped from one side of the bank to the other side, and it was probably, like I said, I didn't pay attention during the day about how far it was. And at night, I couldn't tell, but if I had to guess, probably 30, 40 yards. So it went there and it jumped on the other side, and then you would hear the same thing, like trees crash and everything like that, and then it would jump on the other side. And then it did that another time or two, then it got quiet. The only thing you could hear, there wasn't no bullfrogs chirping, bullfrogs croaking, no tree frogs, nothing. You couldn't even hear anything. The only thing you could hear was us breathing. So we're going, and it stopped. That probably happened, you know, it probably stopped for about 15, 20 seconds. Then all of a sudden, the same thing would go. You would hear trees crashing, and then Danny would shine it on it, and you could see it dart through the woods. Bubba was talking to Danny today. He said he saw coyotes running, or either a coyote running with it, a big coyote, or some other animal running with it. I didn't see that, but Danny told Bubba today that he did see that. So again, so the same thing happened. It would stop, jump from one side of the bank to another, trees crash, and then we're going another 25, 30 seconds, nothing. Then the same thing happened. It was almost like he was toying with it. It was almost like he knew at any second, if I wanted to kill them, I could. At any second, if I wanted to just rip their bodies apart, I could do it. And he knew that, and it was almost he was toying with us. So like I said, the same pattern happened for about 3 minutes. And finally we get to where the Red River, the main inlet, opens up to Lake Texoma. And it wasn't until we was about 150, 200 yards, maybe a little bit more, outside of where that main river was, that I eventually calmed down. We gathered our thoughts, and I wasn't scared so much. So then we get back to the marina. Usually when we get back to the marina, you know, we hang out, talk about the fish, clean the fish. This time we didn't do that. We tied the boat up, hightailed it to the trailer, and I just remember we all three of us, me, Danny, and Bubba, made some stout whiskeys, went out on the patio, looked at each other, and just, you know, we were really shooken up and just kind of talked about what the was that we saw and what just happened to us. And that's the story.
Episode 159, Cat Taylor.
Well, I think it was on the weekend, because my kids had it off. I had 2 young boys, 6 and 9, young kids, and we were getting around. My husband, he had gone home. We lived in Carlisle, so he went home to visit family that was there. And I sent him home with all the guns, because he was going to shoot guns with my brother. And I said, take all the guns with you inside them in, because we had moved a couple times. And they need to be sighted in anyways. So I told him to take all the guns. So we loaded his truck up with guns, and they probably thought he was a gun runner by the time he got there. They pulled him over. But anyways, we loaded his truck down with guns, and I sent him off. So it was just me and the kids, and we were getting around. We were going to watch a movie. So I was fixing to get in there and make some popcorn, because we were really going to watch a movie with popcorn and the whole 9 yards. And as I was in the kitchen, the cow, we had calves out there. You could see mother and calves out there, And I lived so close to the pasture, you could throw a potato and it would land out there in the pasture. Cows could eat it, If I had a bad potato, I just threw it out there. So, I lived really close to this pasture. And I heard a mother calf, and I thought, something's messing around. Because she was kind of like, we raise cows. So you kind of know a stressed mother sound. And I thought, wow, there must be some coyotes, but I hadn't heard any coyotes. I didn't even hear wolves. No coyotes, no wolves in this area. So I'm like, there must be a coyote, but I couldn't remember ever hearing it howl. Because usually they'll start yipping and they'll start doing all kinds of coyotes. We lived around coyotes. And it started, I'm thinking, okay, I need to scare this off. And I'm thinking, okay, I didn't hear no coyotes yipping. You just can't go out there and yell and scream at them, to make them go away. Because the growl was getting more intense. But the mother was kind of like bellowing, and you can hear her rustling around like running or kicking or something. You know how it is. They'll start kicking and walking back. She'll start walking in circles, kicking whatever is messing with her. I think that's what it sounded like that she was doing. Is she kind of was moving around, and you can hear her rustling around and hear her kind of bawling. So it started a growl, and it just wasn't a coyote. So I had one stinking gun in the house, and I called it the goose gun because I could take my hand and hold the barrel standing up, and it still have room to go over. And it was so big that my husband didn't carry that. He wasn't about to shoot that gun and sight that in. It's not necessary. It's just an extremely long gun. Will not even fit in a gun cabinet. That's how huge this gun is. I had that gun, and I thought, okay, I guess I'll have to get this gun out. So as I went in my room to get the gun, I knew that we were in trouble, because I could hear the calf getting taken at that time. And the calf bellowed. It didn't bellow very long. It just bellowed one time. And so I was gathering the kids up, and I was going to the opposite room, which was my bedroom. And I went in the bedroom, and I was looking for shells for this gun. So I'm going through my dresser. I always have shells like laying everywhere. And I'm like looking for shells to fit this gun. And I found one, and I loaded the gun, and I found another one. And by that time, the growling was very intense. And I set my kids down, and I was getting worried, because my little one, he was tiny, and I stuck him under my arm on one side against the dresser, because this barrel was so long. I wasn't about to go outside, because by the time I got to the bedroom and found the shell, I realized this was not a coyote. This was something that I didn't know what it was, and it was dangerous. So I had my little one under my arm, and my oldest one, I had him by the door. As I was sitting there, and I had this gun, and I'm instructing my oldest, don't run in front of the gun, because I've got to swing the gun to the door. If it come in the door, I have to swing the gun that way. And I was trying to do it in a quiet manner, because I knew that this was an animal. I only heard one. This was an animal. And it was very big. The roar was too big. The roar was just like immense. And it started growling even louder. And as I sat there, I looked up and realized that my bedroom did not have a curtain on it. I like to die. And the lights were on. You could see right in, like anybody standing there. That was the only window that I did not have a curtain for yet. To this house I moved into, and I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, common sense would have made you shut the light off, but it would have been too scary, honestly. And I'm not scared of the dark, but at this point in time, I would have been too scared. My kids would have just freaked if I shut the light off so I could see. because really I'm country. I mean, I like to go out at night and everything. Not anymore, but so as I'm sitting there and I'm trying to instruct my kids of what to do, I felt like we were under attack because the roar got so much. I could feel it in my chest, and it started roaring louder. And I say roar, growling is what I mean. It's a growl. It wasn't a roar. It was a growl. Now, I've heard bear. My sister owned a bear, okay? So I know what a bear sounds like. My sister even owned, same sister, we call her Dr. Seuss. She even owned a cougar. So it was like, I know what a big cat sounds like. It did not end in a sound like a cat. It did not. This thing was just getting so loud, I felt it in my chest. And my kids were trembling. You could feel them trembling. And I'm looking at the window, thinking, I don't even have a curtain. So I'm up again, trying to make my kids stand still because I'm looking for more shells because I only had 2 shells. And finally, I realized that I didn't have any more shells for this gun. We moved, so it was like some of this stuff wasn't unpacked yet. You know, it could have been in the gun cabinet. I don't know where the shells were to this gun. All I could find was 2. And this got so loud, I sat back down. And I heard another voice in a distance, another growl in a distance. And it got closer. And it got closer. And there was 2 very distinct growls. And they both continued to growl. And I didn't feel it so much in my chest as I did the very first growl, the very first, whatever killed this animal. That growl was really, really, I mean, it vibrated in my chest. The second growl, they were growling together. And there is nothing that puts a fear in you like the feeling of growling that you don't know what's growling. Yes, I know that it was outside. Yes, I know my door was locked. But I felt like we were in a war because I didn't know. And then I heard another one come up. I heard another one growl. It growled just like the other one at a distance, and I heard it come up. And then they started ripping. You could hear them pull the meat, the flesh of this cat. They were pulling it apart. You could hear them. It was like they had it between them, and they were just like pulling limb for limb. And my youngest says, what about Pete Dog, which is our Rottweiler outside? Because he was barking a little bit before that, but he wasn't making a sound. And I'm like, I said, it's too late. If he's outside, it's too late. So they were crying. And I don't know what I was doing. I don't know what my expression was. I have no idea what I was doing. All I could think of is I don't have enough shells. There's no way that I could protect my kids. I don't have enough shells. Because there's 3 and I only have 2 shells. You know, I only prayed. I said, God, I just said, I hope that by the time they get done, they're full. But I didn't know what they were. And you could hear them crunch the bones like they were eating corn nuts. It was like they chewed the bones up like it was nothing but corn nuts, just crunch. That was it. They ate. You could hear them eating this calf. And I can only think that I hope they're full by the time they get done. And I hope there's not any more. And I didn't know what they were. I knew they weren't a bear. I could tell by the roar. And I knew they weren't a cat because a cat's roar, even when they feed, it has a snarl at the end. And these didn't sound like that. And there was definitely 3. So we sat there, and I was telling my kids they couldn't make a noise. I felt like that mother that wanted to smother her kids so the kids wouldn't make a noise. But they had enough sense, thank goodness, to be quiet. Because I told them, I said, they're they're like a dog. I didn't know what they were. I had no idea. But all I know is a dog can hear a lot, a long ways away. A dog has very sensitive hearing. So our kids knew that, and it was like, they're like a dog. They can hear. They're an animal. They can hear you. So you have to be very quiet. And I was telling Ellen that I'm going to swing the gun that way. Don't get up and run. Because he wouldn't, if I had him on the other side next to the youngest, he couldn't hold the youngest down if he saw it. I didn't know what it was. I was just planning for the worst. And I didn't have enough shells. It got quiet. So we waited there. We sat there. And I'm looking at the window. And I'm waiting for something to show up in the window. Because the window was high enough that a head could fit in. And I didn't know what they were. I still was looking at the window. And it got very still. In about 30 minutes, I thought, okay, I'm going to go stick my head out the door. I wanted to see if the dog was okay. He was chained up on the side between the house and the pasture. So I barely opened the door. And I said, Pete. And I heard his chain move on the house. And I said, good boy. Be quiet. And I shut the door and I locked it. So I knew that the dog had made it through the night. He made it through. They didn't eat him. And I felt kind of confident that if they were hungry, they would have eaten my dog. And I didn't know what they were. And my husband came home 2 days later. But before this, the very next day, I walked out and I looked, and you could see where the grass was mashed down. You could see kind of a bloody spot. There was nothing there, though. And the man that owned the cows, he would come twice a day. He'd come in the morning, he'd come at night. At that morning, he came through, and he went down to the end of the pasture where I used to live. And he has a little gate, and he goes in through there. So he went in there, and he come back. So I'm waiting for him to come back down. There's only one way in, one way out. So I'm waiting for him to come back. And when he come back, I stopped him. And I asked him, I said, I asked him how he's doing, because I never really talked to him. My husband talked to him, but I never really talked to the man. And I said to him, you got any cows that are mama cows that are hurt? Because this mother cow really put a fight up. She really put a fight up. And he said, no, I don't have any. I said, are you sure? He's like, no, I'm pretty sure that I don't have any. So I looked at him and I said, well, and I started telling him about what had happened that night. And I told him, I said, there's something that ate a calf out here. And as I was telling him that there was more than one, his lips started getting white. You could see his color leaving his lips. And I showed him where it was. I said, you see that right? I was just pointing toward it. And I said, that's where it was, right by the house. I said, now, if you go there, I said, you don't take no handgun, because a handgun's not going to get it. I could tell you by the roar. I don't know what it is. It didn't sound like a cat. It didn't sound like a bear. I said, but before you get there, I said, you better take a gun and knock an elephant down. And I'm serious when I say that. And he looks at me and he says, I believe you. So he went on. He thanked me. He went on. And I'm still trying to figure out what it is. There was no internet, or I didn't have one. I didn't have nothing nobody I could ask what it could be. I went over to the neighbor's house. They lived right across the road. And I asked them, did you hear that calf get killed? And they're like, no. And I thought, what were you, drunk? That was really, really loud. How can you not hear it? And this happened at probably about 9-ish, 10 o'clock at night. I'm like, how can these people not have heard it unless their noise was so loud? So it's like they lived across the road. just across the road. And, like you're living in town and you live across the road from a house. That's about how close they lived from me. They never heard it. And I told them, I said, listen, there's something out here. And I said, you need to make sure you watch your kids. Because this ate a calf. Yes, it was a calf, but listen, it's going to be hungry. There's more than one. They're feeding off calves. They're going to be hungry. And I knew it. They were feeding off these calves. They were going to be hungry. So my husband came home and I told him, I said, this trash can that was full of dog food, I told him, I said, bring it in the house. And he's like, no, we'll just put it on the front porch. And I'm like, that's not good enough. Listen, I'm going to tell you how much dog food. I would buy dog food for my dog. And I have never in my life seen a dog that ate so much dog food. Or I thought that's what these things were. These things must have been eating the dog food. Because I looked at Pete and I tell him, I said, Pete, I said, you just got to know me. I'm like, Pete, I said, now, I know what you eat. I said, if I ever get hungry, you're the first one I'm going to eat. I'm telling my dog this, and he's like looking down. And it's like he understood what I was telling him. This happened before because my dog would go through so much dog food. And what these things were doing is they must have been in the dog food somehow or another. So I started feeding Pete dog. I would feed him in his big pan. And when he didn't finish it, I would bring it in the house. And I'm just looking. I'm realizing that these things must, somehow or another must have been eating his dog food in his pan is what I assumed. So my husband, he came in and he put the big, I think it's about 100 gallons or something. You can put 2 50-pound bags of dog food in it. And he was putting it up underneath the porch. And I said, that's not good enough. Cover it up. So he covered it up with a tarp. What if they knocked it over or what? I'm like, I don't want to attract any more animals up here. And he didn't believe me. My husband did not believe me. And he looked at, I said, ask the kids, okay? I was kind of disgusted because, it's like he didn't believe me. And I don't lie, really. I'll tell you straight out. I don't care how bad it hurts. I'm going to tell you the truth. And it's like, okay, we've been married all these years and you're not going to believe that there's something out here. But he did believe. I said, I guess it's a cat. And I told the kids, I said, it has to be a large cat. That was the only thing that I could put my finger on to make them scared. But I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what it was that made that noise. It just didn't sound like a cat. And I told my husband, I said, it didn't sound like a cat. So I worked second shift. And I'd go out there and feed that dog because I didn't trust my husband enough not to just leave the dog food out there because I'm thinking, you got to pick the dog food up. You can feed him twice a day, but you have to pick the dog food up. Do not leave any excess food outside. I don't want to draw these critters back up here because they're going to be hungry really, really soon. Because this is why I knew they were going to be hungry. The man the very next day that I told about the calf getting killed, all of a sudden, early that very next, soon as sunrise, there was a long haul trailer, that cattle trailer, went by the house, and it was full of men. And then there was another trailer. It was a shorter trailer following. And that man removed every cow from that pasture. He loaded it down. All the men that was with him, I never seen these people. I don't know where these guys didn't even look local, but they must have been. They had some serious look on their face when they drove by. So I watched. I watched to make sure, see what they were doing. And when he got all the cows loaded, the man that owned the cows walked to the end of the pasture toward the house. And when he got I'd say about 30 feet from where I showed him that calf was, he motioned the men to stop. And the men were carrying guns that looked just like that stupid goose gun of mine. The barrels were that long. They were huge. And he motioned to the men to stand. He took both of his hands and he motioned them to stand. And he walked. And I could have swore that man was tiptoeing, but I couldn't put my finger. But the way he walked very quietly up to this area. And when he got close enough, he leaned over where this calf was. And you could smell dead, rotten, bloody, dead stuff. You could smell it. I mean, you could tell it was slaughtered there. He shook his head up and down. And instead of turning around and walking away, like you would assume, this guy walked backwards until he came up to the men. And they all quickly turned and left. This man was very scared. I think he really knew what was happening in this area. So I'm worried because my kids get on bikes. They ride up and down the lane. The young boy that lived across the road, he was always up and down the lane. And it wasn't a very long lane. It wasn't long. I mean, there's like 3 houses, maybe 4, and that's it. And I was worried about my kids. So when I fed the dog before I went to work, I was waiting for him to get done. And when he got done, I'd pick his dog food up and I'd bring it into the kitchen and they'd just sit on the counter, you know. And I made a note because my husband was off doing something. I don't know what it was. I left a note for him. I said, now, feed him tonight, because my husband is you feed your dog twice a day kind of person. I said, if you feed him tonight, I said, make sure you pick his dog food up. You don't want those critters coming back because they're going to be hungry because there's no more calves out there, no more cows out there. So I started watching. So I was washing dishes that week. It was about that week. Had to have been that week. I was washing dishes. I thought I'd seen something one day. So I thought, well, hey, they're still in the neighborhood. So the next day I went out to feed my dog before I went to work again. And I seen the end part of 2 of them across the pasture. I seen 2 shadows. You can see, sort of. It was the tail end part of it. It's like, oh my God, they're so fast. 2 of them went by. And I thought, hey, they're here. So I went back in the house quickly, got my binoculars, and I sat on the back porch. And the dog, he was sitting on his house. We had built him a house that he can get on it. Like if the ground was wet or something, he could get on top of his house. And he was watching. He was sitting there, and he must have seen him go by the first time because he was looking that way. The dog was. So I thought, they're going to go back through here because it was like a waterway and tree lines in this pasture, and it curved around, and they had like a watering hole in the middle of the pasture. So it was like, it kind of like did a V or something there. Anyways, I'm watching, and I see 3 of them run by very fast. And I thought, what the heck is that? And they were gray. They weren't, it looked like a tree, like an oak tree gray. They were colored gray. And they were strange looking. They were very graceful, but they did not run like a cat. And this is with binoculars. They were so fast that I couldn't put my finger on and say, get a detail. And I thought, what in the world is that? That's not a cat. It didn't run like a cat. They were graceful, smooth. They didn't run like a cat. And I could not put my finger on what I just saw with binoculars. And as I sat there thinking this, one of them turned around. It had to have. It started walking back. I saw it. It started walking back toward this opening, but that was between the trees. It was underneath this tree, and I'm looking at it. It walks back, and it turns toward me, and it starts walking toward me. And I have never seen an animal. And I thought, what in the heck is that? As I'm watching it, you could see its nose twitching, like it was smelling the air. And I'm looking through binoculars and I'm watching this thing. And it was like, there's a film that's out. They say it's a hoax, and it's an old film, but this thing runs around, and they say it's a hoax, and the guy had a ghillie suit. But here's the thing about that film that reminded me of what I was looking at. It was its shoulders. This thing had massive shoulders, like bowling ball huge. It was very wide, like a pit bull. You know how a pit bull is really, it's got huge, massive chest. This thing had a massive chest. And I'm like, that is no cat. By no means, it's not a cat. Its eyes, I want to say, was golden, and it come right out very deliberately in the sunlight. And I didn't know what I was looking at. And then it did something that it did something that was impossible in my mind. It's like it started standing up. And you could see the legs was like bowed. The leg part was bowed. And the shoulders on this thing, it looked like it got bigger as it stood. Apparently, when you look at it when it's standing up, it's so massive that it looked like Arnold Schwarzenegger in his glory days. It had a very thin waist on it. And it V'd out, it went down into a V. It had a thinner waist than the shoulders. And it had ears, like a dog. But like I want to say a Doberman, sort of. That sharpness of a Doberman. It was a huge canine creature. It wasn't no bear. It had a snout. It had teeth. And I looked at it, and it was gray, and it had scraggly hair, like on the, you know how a man has just sporadic hair on his chest? This thing had sporadic hair on its chest, gray. And there was no distinction from, like, no black in it. It just looked like a tree trunk gray. Its neck was so huge that I couldn't take my arms and put it around its neck. And I'm a grown woman. I could not put my arm around its neck. It was so huge. And as I watched it, it was swaying back and forth. Now this is happening, and I'm in shock. I don't know what this thing is. I'm like, oh my God, this thing is around here. It's not a cat. It's got dog ears. And as I was watching it, it got taller. It's like it set up, you know how a dog will beg? It's almost like it did the beg thing and it started doing that sway back. And it got taller as it was swaying back, like shifting back and forth. Its body was kind of like moving back and forth, side to side. And it got bigger and bigger. And I'm like, its arms, I could not see its hands. Like a dog, but it had its arms bent like, a dog will beg. You know how a dog will put his hands up and beg? It had its arms begging to that, whatever that was. And I'm just looking at the shoulders, and I can't identify this thing. And it's looking right at me. And it's huge. And all of a sudden, its ears click back like a horse that's mad and is fixing to bite you. Its ears click back, and I knew, oh my God, that this thing was mad then, because his ears went back. And soon as its ears went back, my dog, which I didn't know it was my dog, he jumped off his doghouse and he started pacing back and forth. But when he made a noise, because his chain hit, we had a metal piece that was on the doghouse, and his chain hit that when he jumped off, and it made a really loud noise. So I'm thinking, they're back. They come up, because I'm looking through a pair of binoculars, and I'm thinking they come by the peripheral, these animals, and I'm so scared by them, because I'm thinking they're here. They're going to attack. So I dropped my binoculars, and I turned my head to see, and realized it was my Rottweiler. And my Rottweiler started whining, and he was pacing back and forth, crying, just whine. Very odd. He never acted like that. I'd never seen him act that way, but he was whining. I don't know if that creature made a noise, a growl, or what, whatever it was, when the ears clicked back, it must have made a noise because that's when the dog started getting down and pacing and being scared. So immediately I picked the binoculars back up and I focused and it wasn't there anymore. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I've lost it. I looked, could not find it. I dropped the binoculars trying to find it in case it was coming toward me because I'm thinking these things were so fast when they went by. There's no way I could get from the setting position that I was in and into the back door. There's no way I could do it in time. If I did, I was going to be very lucky because when its ears clicked back, I knew I was in trouble. It was very deliberate. This thing, when it come out the tree line, it come back deliberately. It was very deliberate motion. I don't know. But when it looked at me and its ears clicked back, I was warned. I was so warned by then. I get very fearful when I think about it. So when I lost it in the field, the vision, I'm thinking it's running toward me. So I dropped it and I could not find it. So I saw something. I didn't know what it was. And I was scared because I'm thinking my kids go out. This is during the middle of the day and these things are still out moving around. And I noticed the cows' pattern had changed. I thought, well, maybe it had something to do with the weather because they used to be up underneath the trees. Like in the summertime, it was really hot. It was like, and they would kind of like hang out under the trees, tree lines, and it was kept them, kept it pretty cool. And I noticed that their pattern had changed and they were starting to stay up under the trees by the house. So even at night, usually, I don't know where they used to go at night, but they started staying up by my house at night. The cows did. So I noticed this change in the pattern of the animals. So this thing, and I forgot to mention that man that owned those cows, he told me that he did have 3 or 4 calves that was missing before I told him that there was one that was gone that had been eaten out there. And he said that he had 3 or 4 of them at least missing. So this has been going on for the fall anyways. So, I had my husband take the dog food because if this thing can stand up, it can get into anything. I figured dogs are pretty smart. This was canine. It had ears like a dog. I raised big dogs. It was canine. And it stood up. It had hair that hung off its arms, 6 inches, like scraggly long hair on it. And I never could tell if it had a tail. If it had a tail, it tucked its tail like a whippet will tuck its tail up underneath itself. It either tucked its tail. It wasn't a tail that you could really tell. I think it tucked its tail. That was the only thing I could think of. Because I never seen, like when the 3 ran by, you could not see like this long flowing tail. All you could see is the graceful elegance, quickness of it, and it wasn't cat-like. And when that one, the one that showed itself, but when it come back through, it walked very slowly. It was walking very slowly on a side angle. It looked like one of those spotted hyenas. Like the shoulders were higher than the back. And it was like the shoulders were high on it, like a hyena, like the hind hips were shorter than the top part of it. And it reminded me of a hyena in a way, like that crazy hyena cartoon with the crazy cousin that has the teeth that's drooling and he's crazy, that it's like a cartoon with the teeth. It had teeth like that. It reminded you of a hyena. It was all great. There wasn't a spot one on it that I could tell, like nothing distinguishing like a dog spot or a speckle from a hyena or anything like that. It took that shape of a hyena, except it was a lot broader. When it turned toward me and it started walking out in the sunlight, it had massively wide chest. It was like huge. And then when it started to stand up, it got even bigger because then you had the definition of the smaller waist of it, You realize that what is this? It's huge. And then you realize it's got ears. It's got ears. It's not no bear that you could say it's a bear. I've never seen a gray bear either. I only seen brown, but I don't know. This thing was gray. So I could not tell you what it was. When my husband came back from his trip, he was going to go back to work. He had been off work for his arm. He had hurt his arm and he had to recoup on it. And he went back to the farm. So he went back on the farm in 2 weeks. So in 2 weeks' time, we moved from there. And the little boy that lived across the street, he come out when I found out what these things were. I still didn't have a name. And I told the little boy, he come over and he started to ride down the lane. I'm like, oh my God, these things are out during the day. So I told him, I said, hey, come here. So he came over to the house and I said, did your mom and dad tell you about these things that are out here? And he's like, they said something to me. I said, well, hey, it ate a calf in less than 30 minutes, well less than 30 minutes. And I said, there's at least 3 of them. And he looked at me and he had fear on his face. I don't know if his mom and dad had been talking about it or what, but he said, well, what is it? And I looked at him. I said, hey, your dad works out in the woods. His father was the man that lived across the street. He lumbered. They go in and they cut lumber down. So this guy was familiar with the woods. And I looked at the boy and I said, you better ask your dad what's in the woods. I said, it didn't sound like no cat. This is before I seen these things. So the little boy went home and got off his bike. So that concerns me that people still live in that area. Those things, they haven't disappeared. Now, they might move around in the area, but they have not disappeared. They're still there. And if they will eat a calf, they will eat a person. Sorry. Food is food. So I was really concerned about my kids being there. And when I found out that we were going to move back onto the farm, I felt so much better, but I never knew what it was. And I worked with a lady that lived down the very first house on that road. I worked with her on the same line. I worked at a meat packing plant, and she was an Indian, full-blooded, looked like. I'm pretty sure she was full-blooded. I forgot what, Cherokee or something. I don't know. Anyways, I told her, I said, hey, and I told her what happened. And she didn't even want to talk to me about it. She said, we don't talk about that. And I said, so you don't know what that is? And she said, we don't talk about that. We don't say what that is. And she whispered to me, Skinwalker. And I realized what it was after she said, because I was trying to get a name. I wanted to know what the heck did I just see? There's at least 3 of them, because I was telling her, there's at least 3 of them. And I was telling her, she didn't have an animal, but I was telling her, beware of this. And she got really scared. Her eyes got really huge. But she didn't want to talk about it. And she whispered Skinwalker to me. And I realized that it was a Indian thing. It was their belief that skinwalkers will come back or something. You can't say their name or whatever it is. But she did call it a skinwalker. I told the one that lived across the street, and I told the lady that lived down the road. So, hey, yeah, I got everybody on the block. I told everybody I could that there was something there. And now I didn't know what it was. And this was before I realized what it was. But when I found out I was going back home, I was really comforted because I didn't want my kids around that. And from there, I didn't go camping anymore. And I didn't realize how prominent they were. I didn't know what they were. I mean, I could not tell you what I saw. When my husband goes hunting, I tell him, now, there's things out there in the woods. I knew it wasn't a Bigfoot because I seen the one, I forgot. It was a Bigfoot that moved around a long time ago. I seen that and I'm like, no, this thing had ears. This was mean. This was an animal. This is canine. This was a predator. A predator is a perfect name for this.
Episode 165, Chris.
It was midsummer, right around June 1979. I was 13 years old. And it was pretty much typically like any other day. During the off-school hours or on the weekends, we would always make plans to go fishing. Not a lot of my friends were old enough, nor would their parents buy them a weapon, but my father was always I'm going to get you your shotgun at 12 years old. We're going to go get your permit. You know, and he was part of a rod and gun club. You know, we're going to get your permit. And then next thing you know, you graduate to a 30-06 or a 35 or 32. Mine was a Remington. I remember that shotgun well. So anyway, it was typically an average day. You know, I mean, we had pre-planned earlier that day to do some nighttime bullhead fishing, catfish, if you will, with two friends of mine. We'll call one John. And we wanted to meet on Burden Lake Road near this one particular street light at about, we made plans for 10 o'clock. Throughout the course of the day, you got to do your chores and you're not done. You know what I mean? So it ended up being midnight. And so we all agreed upon that. And we get on our bikes and we ride down there. This particular time, none of us happened to ride our bikes because it was relatively close to everybody's house. So we met in front of the mailbox. And now to give people a frame of reference or to try to give them a good image in their mind, it was just after a rainstorm. Now, to make people try to understand, out in Burden Lake, when it was cloudy, and it was that late at night. Oh, for anybody who has any questions about why it's a 13-year-old being up at 12 o'clock at night, back in that day, your parents really didn't have to keep an eye on you. You know, it was way safer back then. And besides, I could carry a weapon and I knew my way around a weapon. So our parents were all good with that. And nighttime fishing was a common thing for kids back then. You know, you grab a Coleman lantern, you grab some lunch or, you know, something to eat in a small cooler. In this case, we didn't have a lot of money. So we, you know, lunch bags, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches or bologna and cheese. And we would meet up and do our thing. On this particular night, we met up at the mailboxes to divvy up earlier in the day, if I had a chance or my friends, we would go fishing for minnows and we would use the minnows as bait. And if we caught sunfish or something like that, we'd cut them up and use the sunfish as bait because bullheaded bottom feeders, anything you stick on a hook that floats to the bottom, that stinks really bad. They're all over it. I mean, to them, that's like lunchtime. So we would go bait fishing if we could throughout the course of the day, preparing for our fishing expedition, if you will, at night. So that's pretty much what happened. So we were underneath the street light, and it was just after the rainstorm. And now I want you to understand, after a rainstorm out in Burden Lake, you know, everywhere else it's almost like different. You know what I mean? It's like Burden Lake is like a lost world. It's like another time, you know. After a rainstorm, even a semi-cloudy day, the night is like dark as ink. I mean, pitch black. But you could clearly see from one street light to the next. That's not a uncommon thing to look at when we're doing what we're doing. And so we're sitting down underneath the light and we're divvying up the bait, which, John, if you're listening, I caught them all. You didn't. So we were divvying up the minnows and we were deciding on where we were going to go. So at the time, we lived near 3 lakes. Okay, first lake, second lake, third lake. And that's just the way they are. First and second lake are man-made. The third lake is not. That's a natural lake. And it's also the deepest lake. But that's besides the point. So we were divvying up the lures, the bait. And deciding actually if we were going to use jigs or not. You know what I mean? Because sometimes you like to jig in between, you know, bites we always brought extra poles and stuff. So John looks over my shoulder, past me. Now that wasn't really too unusual. But then he like points and he's like, "What's that?" Now, fishing is the only thing on my mind right now. This is what I want to do. I mean, we went to school all week, so it's like working hard. You know, so that's all on my mind. It's on my mind. So when he said it again, no, like, "Look, what's that?" I got annoyed and I turned around. Excuse me. I was getting a little choked up here. Down at the next streetlight was the most impossible thing. It was impossible. I mean, this is just, you know, this is something you only see in the movies. And it's a freakish nightmare. You know, but there it is. I mean, you know, kids can be prone to flights of fancy, like I said earlier, but man, when it's standing right in front of you. And in between these two streetlights is a good 150 yards. So that's roughly 300 feet. So we could see eagle eye clear. And at first he saw it grab the rail and we heard it when you're thinking back, because, sights, the sounds, the smells, everything is prominent. You never really forget it. It's like a mom's baked bread. You never forget that smell. You know what I mean? It's like that. It's not something you forget. So he said first one hand and then the other. And I have to clarify now, they were not paws. They were hands. These had 4 fingers and a thumb, an opposable thumb. And what I saw when I turned around was it was already halfway out of the water. Well, I presume the water, there's the dike right there, and it was wet. You could see it. I mean, you could see the water dripping off of it. You could see the breath coming out of its mouth. I mean, it was just picture perfect. I mean, you couldn't miss it. And, I guess there's that old saying, there's that primal fear, when you're really afraid, not fight or flight. This is primal fear. And so as it steps out of the lake, the other friend of mine, we'll call him Tom, he was like, holy blank blank. And that's when this thing heard him say that, and it snapped its head around and looked at us. And I got to tell you, I couldn't see its eyes, but man, you could feel it. You could just feel it. It was like this thing gave off a sense of, the only thing I could say is evil. I can't, projecting fear, but it didn't make any noise. And I don't remember seeing it like a tail or anything like that, but it was definitely dripping water. It was definitely wet. Its mouth was like a German Shepherd. And it had so many teeth in its mouth. I remember thinking to myself, how can it even close its mouth? I mean, and you could see them. I mean, you could see them like he just got done brushing them, bright white. Now, all of this may sound like, half an hour, but this is a matter of seconds. I mean, like seconds. This is just instantaneous. And when he said that, and the thing snapped its head around and looked in our direction, it started walking toward us. So from the dike to the small hill we were sitting on, we were sitting in the road. So, it's like, it's the old saying, if a sniper can see you, or you can see a sniper, he can see you. It's the same thing. If we could see it, it could see us, and it did. There's no question about that. And it walked off from underneath the streetlight into the darkness. Now, I hope you remember saying that in between these two streetlights, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face because it's like ink, black, but we could hear it. We could hear it so clear because it was so calm that night. It was right after a rainstorm, and it was so calm, and everything was so, your senses, they're heightened because you can hear everything, smell everything, see everything, in the exception of the inky blackness. And at first we could hear it just walking. We could hear its paws slapping, or its feet. I couldn't tell you which ones they were because I was so busy looking at its face and its head, which was unusually large. And the breath coming out of its mouth. I mean, it was something right out of a Hollywood movie set. Yeah. And we could hear this thing walking. And then all of a sudden you could hear the pace pick up. And now I don't know if anybody's familiar with, how you can understand how a 4-legged animal is walking and how a 2-legged animal is walking. I mean, I know everybody out there listening right now has had friends that get out of the water and run across the pavement. You could just tell that it's 2 feet, not 4. And this wasn't a gallop. It was a trot. And then the pace started picking up. And that's when we were like, I mean, it was like somebody hit us with a bowling ball. I went one way and my 2 friends went in completely opposite directions of each other and me. I chose to go up the road. Now, being a kid that lives in the woods, I breathed the outdoors at the time. I mean, it was just, that's what I was. Why I chose to go up the road, I can't tell you, but I did. And I went up the road, and there's another street light up Nob Hill Road, probably about same distance, 150 yards. And as I got to that street light, I slowed down a little bit because I'm thinking to myself, I ran so hard and so fast, I could hear my heart pounding, my breath, all these things running through my mind. And when I say that, I mean like it being the predator, me being the prey, that kind of thing. And I slowed down underneath the streetlight. And as I got to the streetlight, it was making the street light that we were just sitting under. As a matter of fact, it was standing right next to our tackle. And then it turned and it looked up at me, up the road. And here I am, like a rabbit in the headlights, standing underneath the street light, and it's looking right at me, and it comes right up the road, and I can hear it. So I'm saying to myself, woods, hide, go now. And that's exactly what I did. And when I hit the woods, I had a plan. I'm going to go through the woods. I'm going to go to this old man's house who, at the time, I won't mention his name, but at the time, he owned a kennel. He slaughtered cows for a living and pigs, anybody who wanted their cattle slaughtered. And I was going to go there because that was the majority of the grouping of houses where I thought I might be safe. So I cut through the woods and did what I had to do and made it actually to his house. And he's got a hedgerow that separates his yard from the person next door to him. Well, I saw that hedgerow, and like an Olympic swimmer, I put my hands out in front of my head and I dove into that hedgerow head first. And I sat in that hedgerow, Vic, for, it seemed like hours, but I know it wasn't. And then this thing, this Dogman, werewolf, however you want to term it, I don't know. I felt like it was coming after me because I could hear it sniffing. It was at the hedgerow, and I was so scared. I was terrified, and I couldn't move. Talk about primal fear. I couldn't move. I felt like a rabbit that was right next to the cougar. Cougar doesn't see him, so the rabbit don't move. You know what I mean? That's what I felt like. And I'll tell you, anybody out there listening, I don't care how curious you are of these things, you don't want to feel that. You don't want to feel that. Anyway, this thing is sniffing, and I knew it was sniffing for me. And it was a heavy breathing, a heavy breath. Like a cow. You could hear it, like a bull snorting. It was kind of like that, only, longer winded, not just a snort. And it was sniffing for me, and I smelled it, and it smelled like rotten meat and dog urine. And it was the most grotesque smell ever. A skunk is one thing. A skunk has a unique smell, and you know it. You smell it, and you know it. This is something entirely different. This is a mixture of scents that you can definitely put your finger on. And two of them I clearly recognized was rotten meat and dog urine. And, wet dog. This thing got closer and closer and closer, and I could hear it. I could feel it. And the fear is, I got chills right now just thinking about it, remembering this. And then, like, out of nowhere, like, I'm not a big proponent of God, but man, it's like somebody sent him. He wasn't really a friend of mine. He was a friend of my older brother's, but he was coming home from work or a date. I don't know, but the headlights hit the top of the hill, and you can clearly see the headlights. Now, at this time, I got to tell you, I didn't see this thing. I could just feel it, and I could hear it sniffing. And, when the lights come up the hill, I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, I'm saved. This is like a godsend. And then everything went quiet. And the lights were gone. I heard his door open. I heard it close. And I didn't hear nothing after that. Now, nothing. It was like dead silent. But the unusual part is when I say silent, there were no crickets chirping. The frogs stopped croaking. There's peeper frogs out there like you would not believe. As a matter of fact, when I hear them to this day, they put me to sleep because of the memories I have of that. And everything was there was no dogs barking. And you got to understand, I'm sitting right next to a kennel. This guy's got dogs everywhere. Not a peep out of these animals. Not a sound. So being that, and I was very aware of this, very aware of it. Being that as it may, I stayed in the hedgerow. I didn't move. I was breathing so light. It felt like my lungs were going to explode because I desperately needed to take a good breath of air, and I couldn't because I was so scared. And then I just got the courage, and I just picked my head up out of the hedgerow, and there was nothing there. And as a matter of fact, the moon was out. It wasn't really super bright, but it was bright enough where it wasn't as dark as it was. And, my eyes had well adjusted to the dark by this time, and I could see, pretty clear, and there was nothing around. I looked, my head was on a 360-degree swivel. Wow. Excuse me. I didn't see anything there. And the kid down the road, I don't know, maybe he was in his house or something like that. I don't know. I managed to get the courage to jump out of the hedgerow. And when I say jump, I mean like I was on a trampoline. I jumped out of that hedgerow and I ran so fast to my house. And lo and behold, when I get there, my buddy Tom is sitting on my deck screaming at me in profanities to open the door and get in the house, you know? And my mother didn't allow this kid to stay overnight. She didn't even like him or his family. So, you know, it was like, you know, I was like caught between a rock and a hard case, and there's no way I'm going to leave my friend out there. So I invited him in, and we were real quiet the whole night. And, you know, we really didn't talk much. When we did, it was always, what was that? It was a werewolf. No, it wasn't. Yes, it was. You saw what I saw. What I saw was blah, blah, blah. You know, I think it was Bigfoot, you know, that kind of thing. We were kids, but I know what I saw. He knows what we saw, for crying out loud. I haven't talked to him in 20 years, easily 20 years. And my other friend, I haven't seen him in well over 30. And we don't really talk much about it, but yeah, that's my story. We were pretty much up all night long. I mean, scared out of our wits. I had nightmares for, I can't even tell you how long. You know, it was quite a while before I went back out in the woods or even stayed out late. If I did, I had, you know, we had like 7 dogs. One of my dogs was always with me, and I always had my 22. But I've since gotten over it. You know, you grow up and that kind of thing, it sits in your mind your whole life, you know, but you never really stop thinking about it.
Episode 168, Rick.
I'm going to start, Vic, with how I wound up going up there in the first place, because to me that's part of the story. What had happened was, I'm an engineer, and at the time I was doing software engineering installation for telephone systems all around the country, so I was rarely home. And because I'm rarely home, I didn't stay up with current events. And apparently there was this young man from Owensboro, Kentucky that had come down to Central Florida, down there where I live. And he had this vampire cult. And his name was Rod. I don't want to give his full name, but it was actually a fairly famous trial. This young man led a bunch of high school children in a vampire cult. And he came down to this small town where I live and had recruited several of the high school kids there to be in his vampire cult, where they would literally drink each other's blood and initiate each other into this cult. But anyway, this one young girl that he had recruited into his club wanted to get away from home. She was a very young little girl, and she said she couldn't get away from her parents. So he apparently went in and he murdered the 2 parents with an accomplice of his in his cult there. They bludgeoned the parents to death and stole their vehicle and took off out of Florida, where they were captured. When I got home, this had already gone down. I didn't know anything about it. So I wound up getting impaneled on the jury of the trial for this young man. And after having to witness all the brutality and these children that grew up in this small town that I grew up in that were into witchcraft and Satan worship and reading the Necronomicon book and following the spells in it and stuff like that, really had me upset. And I was just very, very surprised that this was going on in my hometown, my very small hometown. So my uncle, like I said, was down visiting our family at the time, and he had planned a fishing trip in Kentucky. And so he asked me if I'd like to go to kind of get my mind off things. And my wife thought it was a wonderful idea because she could tell how depressed I was. And so I decided, yeah, you know, he said, we'll spend a week up there. We'll just take it easy and just forget about everything. And I thought it was a great idea. So I packed up my stuff and off we went to Kentucky. We got to the Daniel Boone National Forest. We actually went to his home in Lexington first, packed up some gear, and then he drove us in his truck. I followed him up in my car, and then he drove us in his truck out to this area, which was, it took us over 6 hours to get to this area. It's very densely forested. It's way back. He said it's so far back they have to pump the sunlight in. But it's way, way back in the woods. There's really no civilization out there. I didn't see a home for half an hour. But anyway, we finally got there. It was almost dark by the time we got there. So we decided we would camp that night there on the bluff. And then in the morning, we would start carrying all our gear down to the shore there by the rock castle to start fishing. We both woke up about sunrise the next morning, and when we first got out of the truck, I noticed at the time it was very cold, but not windy. It was a crystal clear day. This is early March 1998. It was very bright and sunny, but it was pretty chilly out. But there wasn't a bird chirping. There was no noise whatsoever coming out of the woods. It was dead silent. So we started grabbing our gear, and you get this feeling like you're being watched. But from the years I've spent in the military, that third eye wakes up, and you start feeling like you're being watched, and you start looking over your shoulder, but you don't really see anything. You know, we kind of shook it off, and he and I started carrying our gear down to the shoreline of the rock castle. And we got some chairs down and some bait and stuff, and we had guns with us. We actually carried guns because there are supposedly bear in that area, although I've never seen any or heard of any in there. He said they're in there. So I actually had a sidearm, a 357 Magnum. He had a 44 Magnum. And I had a 30-06 rifle, and he had a 12-gauge shotgun. We carried all that down, and we were just get set up fishing. We heard something in the woods. It sounded like it was walking, but it was making quite a bit of noise. And it would snap limbs, and it sounded like it might be bipedal. We weren't quite sure. But, sorry, Vic, this thing, we kept looking over our shoulders, and we kept hearing leaves and twigs breaking behind us, limbs snapping, and like something was walking around behind us off to our left. And then just out of nowhere, this thing bounded out of the woods. It probably jumped 20 feet onto the shoreline looking right at us. Now, it was on all fours at the time when it bounded out, and it was looking at us, and I can't even describe. This thing was absolutely massive. It was huge, every bit of over 400 pounds, 400 to 500 pounds at least. It was huge. And I thought at first it was a bear, but in my mind, I was frozen. I couldn't move. And my uncle was standing behind me. I couldn't see him, and I didn't know what he was doing, but I knew I was frozen solid. I could not move. And then this thing began to stand up on its hind legs. And when it stood up, it made this, I can't describe this noise it made when it stood up. It's kind of like large knuckles cracking and air escaping at the same time. And this thing, it must have been 8 feet tall when it stood up. And it was solid jet black. Its fur actually looked well groomed. It was solid jet black. It had ears on the top of its head that were narrow, long, and pointed with tufts at the top, kind of like a bobcat has. It had a very large, broad head with a very long snout, but wide snout, and a mouthful of teeth like I've never seen on anything. And every single one of its teeth were sharp. And it was kind of hunched over, and I don't know if the hair around its shoulders and its back was thicker and longer, or if it was just standing up on its back or what, but it came down to some really broad cannonball type shoulders that looked human. And this thing had long arms. They were extremely muscular. It came down into hands that looked like massive raccoon hands or claws, and it had long nails on it. They reminded me of a raccoon, but just huge. And it had a very thick, broad body and chest that would put any bodybuilder to shame. And it went down to very powerful, strong legs in the thighs. And then the lower legs were like dogs' legs. They were hawks that bend backwards. and this thing kind of hunched over like it was going to pounce, and its ears laid back on its head, and it began to growl this growl that when it growled, your whole body just shook. I mean, you could feel it through your chest, and like I said, I was frozen. I could not move. And right at that time, I heard this incredible, loud boom over my head. And apparently my uncle had pulled his .44 and fired this thing over its head. And this thing did a backward somersault from where it was at, in the air, over into the woods, and bolted out. And as soon as it did, he and I hauled tail up the bluff to the truck. We left there's maybe still stuff sitting there, I don't know. We left our chairs there. We just grabbed our guns and our poles and booked it back up the bluff. Got to the truck, just threw our guns in the back and took off. And we no more than took off, and that thing bounded out of the woods on the other side of the power line. And we were flying down this power line, hitting bumps and potholes, and stuff was flying out of the back of the truck. And this thing was right on our tail the entire time. And as soon as we hit the hard road, he floored it. And this thing stayed with this truck. I don't know how fast he was going, because I was physically getting sick from it. But it followed us. We had to be doing every bit of 60 miles an hour, and this thing was still with us on our rear quarter, the right rear quarter. And finally, it either tired or just got tired of chasing us and veered off and went back into the woods. And we didn't talk about it at all the way home. I got fit. Like I said, I got physically sick and had to vomit outside the truck. And I have never been so scared in my life, Vic. Like I said, I did 3 tours of combat and never had that kind of fear go through me, and had never froze in fear like that. Over and over, I thought in my mind, we got to the house. He got out of the truck. I got out. I threw my stuff in my car and I pointed it towards Florida, and I came straight home. I didn't even slow down. All I stopped for was gas. And all the way home, I thought about the irony is I left Florida to get away from vampires, only to run into werewolves in Kentucky. But anyways, that's pretty much what happened, Vic. That's my story.
Episode 169, Josh Turner.
There's a guy that I talked to. Now, I talked to him way back in the spring, probably early spring, March, something like that. He sent me a story, and I was reading through some of the different encounters and stuff, and this guy sent me a story. Now, he's from Canada. We'll call him Clint. It's close to his real name. He's from Saskatchewan. And if I remember correctly, I got to go back and look. I have a million things on my messenger, but he was actually in Quebec, I believe, that they were working. Now, he told me that they have these teams that they go out and when they do the surveying for the lumber companies, and they earmark trees and tree lines so you can cut this tree here, you can't cut that tree there. I'm assuming that's kind of what it was. He just said survey teams, and I'm adding to that because I think that's what it was that he was doing. But he said that they have these really big trucks that they drive, and now they're twice the size of a dump truck. Not all of them, but they have one that they use for work. It can plow through anything, but they're really slow and they're humongous. And he said that this truck is big. You can lay down in the floorboard of it comfortably. He's 5'9", he said. He said that he could lay down in the floorboard of it comfortably. And so he said one night he was with 3 other guys, and 2 of them slept in one truck. They were one in front of the other because they didn't want to have to drive the 26 miles back to their camp. Now, going 26 miles back to camp, if you were at a regular place in a regular job, that would be nothing. But after they'd been working 14-hour days, he said they'd been on for 14 days straight, 13 to 14-hour days. He said exhaustion and then driving 26 miles is like a couple of hours through all that woods because of the trails that you have to go through. So he said that they decided to camp out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it was the middle of nowhere. And he said that there were bears out. It was that season. They were roaming around at this time. He said it was summer and it was hot. And he said that it's that 1 or 2 months where it actually gets pretty hot in Canada. So anyway, He said they had the windows cracked a little bit, and he said that there were two guys that were sleeping in the truck behind him. He was in the truck that was in front of the other truck. Didn't have a pistol. All he had was a flare gun. The guys in the other truck had a rifle, and I believe it was a 30-06. I think that's what he said it was. And he said that when he was sitting there in his truck about 3 a.m, I thought that was significant because a lot of weird stuff happens around that time. That's odd that it's always like 3 a.m, But he said it was around 3 a.m. He felt the truck shake, like the truck moved. Now, I asked this guy, when I finally was able to speak with him, I asked him, I said, how much do you think these trucks weigh? He said they weigh tons. I mean, it's like a lot. And he said he couldn't tell me exactly, but he said that these are humongous trucks. You climb up a ladder to get up into the truck, about 6 feet, I think, is what he said. And when you climb up into the truck, he's like, the truck doesn't move. He said, I weigh 250 pounds. The truck doesn't move when I get up in it. And he said he's a heavy-set guy. But he said that when he was laying in the floorboard of the truck, he feels the truck shake, like it moves. And he felt like something was on the side of the truck. So he sat upright and he looked out the window. And all he saw were two ears sticking up at one point, and then he heard like a sniffing sound. And when he looked out the window and he saw that, he thought, what in the world? What is this? He said it looked like wolf ears. But he said his first reaction was, it can't be a wolf, it's got to be a bear. But he knew it wasn't a bear. He's like, this had to be a wolf. And then like, it was just a split second and it lifted its head real quick and then it was back down. And he was like, oh my gosh, that's a wolf. I just saw a wolf climb up onto the side of my truck. So he was in shock. So he was like, there's no way this is happening. How could a wolf climb up on? So then he felt it like go back down. Like he heard it jump down off the truck, the twigs snapping, the rocks, whatever. And he said that it went up the other side, which would have been the driver's side because he was facing the passenger side. And he said he looked over his shoulder and the first thing that caught his peripheral was a head in the window. And he said that he turned around and kind of got up in the seat, and he said that he saw this thing. It was blackish gray, and he said that it was standing on the side of the truck, and its head was directly in the window, and it was just staring at him. And I asked him about that, and I said, do you have the details? Can you give me any details? Because I know a lot of times when people are flustered and they see these things, they don't really have the details. It's like they escape you. I know that from experience. But he said that the one thing he remembers is the mouth was closed at that point. It was just looking at him. And he said it was just staring at him, like not blinking, it just staring at him. And he said it had like human eyes. And he said that he was just looking at it. It was looking at him. He could see it in the moonlight. Clearly, it was a full moon. And he said that its head was gigantic, that it covered up the bulk of the window. And he was like, what in the heck am I looking at? What is this thing? And he said he was stunned. He didn't know what it was. And he said that it lifted up its hand. Now, I asked him about that too. He said it had a hand. And he said that it kind of tapped the glass, like as if he was a fish in an aquarium. He said, I felt like a fish in an aquarium, dude. And he said it like tapped the glass and then it slid its hand up and it got its claws on the top of the window where it was cracked. And he said that these windows are real thick, like inches thick, bulletproof glass. He said they're real heavy. And he said that this thing began to push down on it with its claws. And he said that once it started getting a little play in there where its fingers could come through, it started pushing more aggressively. And he said that he could see it grimacing. And he said the whole time, he goes, it stared me in my eyes. And he said, I had to look away. I didn't know what to do. He goes, I was terrified and I was frantically radioing to the guys in the truck behind me, just please wake up. Please, for the love of God, wake up. And this guy, his voice was cracking and shaking when he told me this. And we had to talk 2 different times because he couldn't finish what he was telling me. So, yeah, this guy was really upset. And I know that this wasn't bull crap. This guy, something really traumatic happened to this dude. And so this thing kept pushing down on the window. And he said that eventually it got to where the window was about partway, like where he could reach his hand in. And he said that he finally got a hold of the other guys. And they woke up. And this thing, he said at that point, it jumped down. And he said that he watched it in the back window kind of lope. Now, in my words, lope. I don't know how to describe it. He said it almost got down on all fours. And he said that the way it ran, it almost looked like a gorilla. But he said that it was definitely canine in origin. It had a tail. He said it was a short tail. And he said that it kind of ran toward the other truck. And he said it kind of stood up on these weird-looking hind legs. The hind legs, he described them to me like they were the hawks, the backward bent hawk-like legs, but he said they were real short, which was interesting because sometimes people describe them as being long. And I think there's all kinds of different species or subspecies of these critters. I don't know. But he said that this thing, it debated about going up onto the other truck, but then it ran back to his truck and it went around back to the passenger side. And it got up in the passenger window and was looking at him. And he said, I debated about trying to make it to the other truck. He's like, but I didn't know what to do. He goes, I fumbled for the key box at that point. I was trying to get the flare gun out if I needed to. And he's like, I was getting ready to get in the truck and try to start it. He goes, I didn't know where I was going to go. The truck's so slow, Once I got out of the clearing, I would have just been trying to plow through trees. He goes, maybe I could knock it off because I didn't know what to do. But he said that finally one of the guys took him seriously and he looked out the window and he saw this thing standing on the side of his truck. And he said that this thing finally had jumped back down off the passenger side. This would have been the second time around, I guess. And it went and it got up onto the driver's side again and began pushing down on the window again. And he said at this point, it got its arm through, got to the elbow and was trying to get down. He was almost to where it could unlock it, dude. Now, he said this thing was going for the lock and it was starting to kind of look down at the lock like that's what it was doing. And he was like, oh my God, this thing is trying to unlock the door. Like it had enough intelligence and it shocked him. He was like, this is not an animal. This is not a primate. This is not a canine. This is some sort of with human intelligence. Maybe primitive human intelligence, but it had intelligence enough that it was trying to unlock the door. And he said that at that point, he goes, dude, I almost fainted. He said, I got lightheaded. He said he felt like he had, like his brain was just going to shut down and he was going to collapse. And he said about that time he heard 2 gunshots, bang, and then another one, bang. And he said that thing stopped. And he knew that the guys behind him were taking a shot at it, which he had been telling them to do because he didn't know what else to do. And he said that the thing just kind of looked in their direction and jumped down and then kind of just walked into the woods slowly. And he said it didn't run. He said it just walked, looking back over its shoulder, just walking on its hind legs like it was pissed off. And he said that when they looked, one of them spotlighted in the other truck, they used a spotlight and they saw another set of eyes in the woods watching. And he said that he knew at that point that they had been hearing noises. They had been hearing things for days. He said, I knew what it was now. He said, and I quit. He goes, that was it. When I got back to the camp the next day, he goes, I was done. He's like, I never went back in the woods again. He said that the year was 1999, I think. 1998, something like that. It was toward the end of the millennium, whatever. This was not a recent encounter. This was, something that happened years ago, but the guy remembered it like it was yesterday. And he told me this story. He said he'd held it in for so long. And I guess his aunt listens to the show and said that he should tell you the story, but he didn't want to come on the show. So he told me. And so I'm telling you, but that's his encounter. That's the Canadian encounter. And I guess we'll move on to the next encounter. This one, there's a guy that likes the show. He's from my hometown, and his cousin had an encounter in Arkansas. Texarkana is a little town. It's literally right on the border in between Texas and Arkansas. That's why it's called Texarkana. Now, I don't know if anybody knows anything about history, but there was a serial killer there back in, I think, 60s. I think it was the late 60s. Don't quote me on that. Somebody will probably go, it wasn't the 60s. It was the 70s. I don't know. Just like the thing with the don't feed your dog grapes. Well, my dog always ate them. Never had a problem. Your dog got sick from grapes. I apologize. Everybody jumped on me about that. They key in on everything I say and they go, that's not correct. Well, this guy was a serial killer. He never got caught. But there is a movie that was made about this guy. It was called The Town That Dreaded Sundown. I watched it as a kid. Kind of creeped me out, probably because I watched it around Halloween and I was by myself. But it was about this guy who murdered all these people, and he got away with it, and they never caught him. And so, anyways, he wore like a gunny sack on his head. But that's the only thing I really know about this town. I've been through there a couple times, and I've been on my way to Arkansas or on my way to Louisiana. I've been through that corridor. It's a little town right there on the border. This guy went out to hunt deer on a lease. They said it was north or northwest of Texarkana, something like that. He said he was out there on some land. He was hunting. And he kept feeling like there was something watching him when he was heading out to the stand. But he said once he got out there, he was out there about 6 hours from the morning. He said he got there about 10 a.m. He was out there until like 4 in the afternoon or whatever time it was. And he said that he finally bagged a buck. It wasn't a real big one, but it was decent size. And he said that it was only about a mile from there to where his truck was parked. He went with another guy, and where their truck was parked, it was about a mile. So he walked back and he drove his truck to get as close as he could to the kill. And he said he had to drag it about 150 to 200 yards, something like that. But he said that once he got it back to the truck, this was very recent. He said it was last year. He said he texted his other cousin that he was with, and the guy said, well, I'm not ready to go yet. It's still mid-afternoon. He's like, I'm not done. And he said that he was tired, and he had been up for a while, and they had hunted the day before and the day before. So he said he was really tired. He kept feeling like something was there watching him. It was making him uneasy. So he decided to take a nap. He figured he got his. He wasn't going to keep going. But his cousin hadn't gotten anything yet that season, so he wanted to stay longer. He was like, well, he'll probably be here a couple more hours, till dark. So he decided to take a nap. And he said that he woke up because he heard something hit the tailgate. And he said that at that point, he thought, wow, is there like maybe a deer or something bumping against my truck? That'd be fortunate. So he looked up in the rearview mirror, and he said it was just getting dark. It had just gotten dark, and where he was at, there was a canopy of trees. There was a lot of trees, so it was already pretty much dark, but you could still see a little. And he said that there was something standing at the back of his truck. He could just see like some fur or something over the top of the tailgate. And he said that he heard the tailgate latch open. And he said that it began to move down, and he was like, this was unbelievable. He said he was looking at it in the mirror going like, is this really happening? My tailgate is literally being lowered, but I don't see anything. I just see like this poof of hair. And he said he flipped on the cargo light, and that's when he saw it. And he said this thing kind of ducked down like it was trying to hide, but he said that he caught a glimpse of the head, and he just saw this furry, poofy head. And when he told me that, poofy is the exact words he used, I asked him, what does that mean? You said it was poofy. He said it was like if you took a chow dog. Now, this is what he told me. He said if you took a chow dog and you bathed it and then you like blow dried it, he said, because one of his ex-girlfriends had a little foo-foo dog. I forgot what kind of dog he said it was. He said, but it looked almost like a chow, but it had big pointy ears that stuck out, but the poof on the top of the head stuck out more than the ears. That's what he told me. And then the weirder thing about it was he said that it kind of ducked down behind the tailgate, and he was like, I wanted to get out and look. He goes, but I didn't know what the thing was. And he said, and it had a big head. He said, and it scared him. But then he said that he saw this weird looking arm. And he said that the arm was black and it had these really white looking nails on it. And he said the nails looked like talons, like claws. And he said that he just saw one arm slide up real quick and just literally impale the deer's neck, like grab it by the neck. And then the other arm grabbed the thigh or whatever. And he said that he just saw it yank it. First it was one hand, then the other. And he said it just yanked it off the tailgate. And then he said it began to drag it really quickly out into the woods. He said he was staring at this the whole time. And he said he had a pistol, but he did not want to shoot at this thing because he was just terrified. And he thought, why the f- am I still sitting here, And he said, he's like, I was stunned. He goes, I was too scared. He goes, my legs were shaking. He's like, he goes, dude, I felt like I was going to throw up. And he said that this thing was so weird looking, dude. He said that the arms and legs were smooth. He said it was real black, like a black chow with poofy hair, but smooth looking black arms and legs. Like he said that the hair might have been just really short on the arms and legs. It was weird. He said it was almost like if somebody was wearing a fur coat, but like the best werewolf mask you could possibly imagine. He goes, I don't know what it was, dude. It was just so scary. And the hands, the nails were so long. He said it was so creepy. He goes, I don't know what it was, dude. He goes, it just didn't, he goes, I couldn't figure it out. He said finally he just took off. And then he texted his cousin and he drove out there to where his cousin was at and said, I'm on my way over there. And he described it to his cousin. His cousin looked in the back of the truck, saw the blood, saw that there was a deer back there, and was like, what happened to your kill? He said, this thing took it. He's like, we got to get out of here. There's some kind of weird creature out here. He told me it wasn't overly tall. He said it was probably about 6'3", 6'4", he estimated. He said the legs were bent, but they weren't pronounced. When I described to him the backward bent legs, he didn't recognize that. He said that it looked hunched over and its legs looked human-like almost. but like with weird looking feet. And he just said, I don't know how to describe the feet. They're like pawed feet, but kind of big, you know? He's like, that's the best I could see of it. You know, he goes, my head, I was turned looking at it when it was pulling it away. And he said it never took its eyes off of me. And he said that it opened the tailgate. I mean, I don't know what to make of that story. That story's crazy. But that was my Arkansas story. And I apologize to everybody because my voice is kind of, I just got over a slight illness and my voice is kind of messed up here. But I got another one. Now this one is out of Norway. I'm getting out all the out-of-state stories first. Now, this guy, and I have permission to use his story, but I didn't ask permission to use his name, but I'm sure he'll know who he is, was kind enough to share his story with me. He's a guy from Germany. His family has a vacation home in Norway. And his story, and I know that when me and you talked about it, it was pretty crazy. So anyways, this guy's story, he was up in a vacation home in Norway near a lake. Now, the name of the town was Evie. It's E-V-J-E. I don't know how to pronounce it. Evie, or I don't know how to pronounce that. My nephew was trying to tell me how to pronounce it. I don't know. But anyway, this was a family vacation home. And he said that the nearest neighbors were like 5 miles away. And he said that they were rarely there. So if anything happened, nobody can hear you scream. I mean, he's pretty much on his own. And I really sympathize with this guy. It was scary what happened to him. He said he went out on the deck to take a smoke. And he said that while he was out there, it was about the second or third day, I think he said, he saw this strange looking hairy creature dragging a moose by the lake by its neck. And he said that when he was out on the deck, I guess he made some noise and it looked at him. It saw him. And he said that it stopped what it was doing and just stared at him. And he thought, oh my God, what on God's green earth am I looking at here? What is this thing? And he said that he said it was only about 6 foot tall. You know, he said 250, 300 pounds. Bulky, but not overly bulky. But it was short. It wasn't like the big, just like the Arkansas encounter. It wasn't a real big creature. But it had a menacing face on. He said it was terrifyingly ugly face. And he said that this thing just stared at him. And then it kind of walked into the bushes around the other side of his cabin. And he thought, oh my God, where's it going? And then he said it let out this howl, like a blood-curdling howl. And he said that it just shook him to his stomach. It scared him so bad. He went back in the cabin. And he barricaded himself in the cabin. He said he barricaded the windows and the doors. And he just sat there by the front door with an axe. Because that's all he had. He said he went to the utility closet and he grabbed an axe. And he said he sat there all night just smoking cigarettes. Turned off all the lights so it couldn't see in, you know, barricaded himself in there as best he could. And he said he was too scared to try to make it to the car to get away. And he said he just sat there with the only light coming from the fire going inside of a wood burning oven. And he said that that was all he had. And he just sat there all night with an axe. And he said that all night long he heard bellowing howls and shrieks coming from the woods and the shaking of trees and bushes. And this thing was like, just making a noise, like it knew he had seen it, and it wasn't happy, it was angry. And he said that he heard it running up around the house, around the cabin, and he said he was just petrified, and his phone got no service out there. So he's like, dude, it was the most terrifying night of my life. He goes, I didn't know what to do, I was stuck. And I thought about that, and I thought, oh my God, can you imagine being by yourself, by a lake, in the middle of the woods, there's nobody else around? What can you do? I mean, you have an axe. That's all you got. And this creature is out there and it's pissed off. So I really felt bad for this guy. He said the next day he went to town and he filed a report, whatever. And he said he went back to the cabin because he didn't have service. Well, some detectives finally came out there to talk to him. He said that he didn't speak Norwegian like they do, like not real good. But he said that they were kind of talking back and forth. They weren't laughing at him and they weren't making fun of him. They were just speaking back and forth. And he said that they acted like they might have actually believed him, but he wasn't for sure. And that they were just kind of like, yeah, well, nothing we can do. He said that they didn't even bother writing anything down or anything. They just came out to look and then they just left. And then, you know, I guess the next day he packed up and he left. So that's his story. So that's the story from Norway. And that is my stories from outside of Texas. Those are the 3 stories I had from outside of Texas. Now we're going to get into Texas. I'll start with a story from Lake Travis. Now, I had a friend of mine who worked for the Colorado River Authority down there in Austin. Now, these guys are security, but they're police officers too. Now, what it is they have to go through TCLO certification to become cops. This guy that I'm going to tell you about, I went with him and a friend of mine to interview him. I met him from a friend of a friend. Now, this guy's story, we'll call him Kevin. It's not his name, but we'll call him Kevin. He is still in law enforcement. He's relocated to another state because of what happened to him. Now, on his route, he had a patrol route that he would do near the lake. Now, this is about 10, 12 miles outside of Austin. Now, it's in between, I'll just say the location, in between Lakeway and Cedar Park. Anybody knows the Austin area, it's out there. There's a wastewater treatment plant. There's a couple of them out there, actually, but there's one of them in particular where he went to every night to do his rounds. And he said that on this particular night, he opened the gate, opened the fence. He went in to check and do the D-Tex. They have a D-Tex they have to click, and it goes beep, and then it lets you know that, and we have that too, to let you know that you've hit the property, and they can send a computer printout. Tells them that you were on the property. They can't say, you weren't there, you didn't do it. No, I was there at 3 o'clock, and this is what happened. Well, he said that he was walking around the property. Said he walked around the property and was almost done with his patrol, got around the other side of the property, and there leaned against the back wall what he first thought was a dog, and then he saw like arms or a hand dangling down, and he thought, what is that? Is that a man? And then he realized, he said it was hairy, and he had like a weird looking arm, and he thought, first thought he said he thought it was a Bigfoot. It was Sasquatch. He goes, dude, it's real. You know, it's sitting right there. He said, then it lifted up its head. And he said that when it lifted up its head, he said, Wolf, he's like, I've never seen something so hideous my whole life. He said, this was the ugliest creature. He said, it looked like something that crawled out of hell. He said it lifted up its head and its teeth, it just opened its mouth like it yawned. He said every tooth was sharp. He said it just looked like a mouthful of razor blades. And he said that it unfurled itself. Now, that's his exact words. He said it unfurled itself and it leaped up to its feet and was immediately standing up. He said it was 8 feet tall, at least. And he said he was standing there, and he said he drew out his pistol, because when he first saw it, he drew his pistol out because he didn't know what it was. And he said that he knew immediately that that gun, that Glock, was not going to do anything to this creature. And he said that, dude, he goes, even to point it at the thing, I was terrified. And he said it didn't run immediately. It just looked at him, took a couple steps, and just kind of pushed its chest up and out. And he said that it threw its arms back and like pushed its chest out like it was getting ready to howl. And he said it cracked, that there was a popping, cracking noise. And he said he didn't know what that was. A lot of times when these things go from all fours to upright, I've heard that before. But he said that the noise, and I asked him about that, and he said that the noise happened when it popped its chest out. He said it was like poofing itself up like, look at me, look at this. Now, he looked me dead in my eye. Now, a couple times he had to stop and go outside. We were in a coffee shop down in Austin, and he just, I don't know, man. I felt kind of bad because I kind of kept pressuring him to finish, you know, and I've done that before with people, and sometimes sometimes I feel bad. I mean, I don't want to be pushy, but this dude was starting to aggravate me because he just didn't want to finish the story, and I felt like guilty because I was like, dude, hurry up, tell me this, you know, but I needed to know, you know, and I wanted to be able to get this story, and it really got to him. And I had waited about 6 months to get the story from him in person when he came back to town, because he still has a lot of family here. And so him meeting with me was nice that he was willing to do that. So I met him in person. But anyways, this thing, he said it unfurled his chest, and then he said it took 2 steps and leaped onto a 10-foot barbed wire fence, and it like jumped onto the fence and then just kind of somersaulted over it sideways. He said it was unreal. He said it was like Spider-Man. He said it got into the woods, ran right into the woods and disappeared. He said then he turned and he looked down and his legs were shaking. He's like, he didn't know what the sound was. He said my teeth were chattering. That's never happened to me in my life unless I was cold. And he said it wasn't cold when this happened. I think he said it was late September or early September, something like that. But he said that this thing leaped over the chain link fence like Spider-Man. And he said that at that point, it roared out of the woods. Now, this is what he told me and the witness that I was with. He said that the trees shook. And I thought to myself, that's, but in his mind, it probably did, because that's how scared this guy was. And he said he looked down and he had urinated himself. And he said that this thing stunk. He said it smelled like garbage and like urine, wet dog. It was really bad. And he said that the thing that really got him about it was that he could feel the sound from this thing's roar. And I asked him now, I said, hey, did it howl or did it roar? He said, dude, the thing roared. He said it was like, roar, and he said that it was so loud that it echoed off of the lake, off the hills around the lake. Cause I know that area where he's at. I know exactly where I've been there. I went and I checked that place out. Now I drove through there. Me, I'm going to go look around because I'm not one of those people from Scooby-Doo that wants to investigate, gang. No, I'm not going to do that. I drove by and I said, well, there it is. And I drove. So I know the location of where this was at. And now my mom's company that she used to work for actually was one of the people that built these water treatment plants. So I knew where it was at. But he said that it roared and he could feel it in his chest. And he said that it was the most terrifying thing. And he said that the next 2 days he called in sick, and then eventually he went back to work. He tried to. He couldn't do it. He said he was missing. He wouldn't stop at that place. He wanted to get transferred to another route. He said it was a good paying job, but he just couldn't do it. And eventually they let him go. And he moved away. And he moved to another state. I feel bad for the guy. He said before that he liked to go fishing out on Lake Travis. He said it was something he liked to do. He said, but after that, he just couldn't do it. And that was it. He moved and I felt bad for this kid. And I also feel kind of bad about pushing him, Vic, but I wanted to hear the story and I wanted to get it. It was just hard to sit there with somebody who breaking down, but there's that story. The next story we're going to go to another lake. Now this story, there's a guy that I knew since I was in elementary school. And this happened to his uncle's best friend. Now, I'll give you a little backstory to this one. It's called Lake Stamford. You can look it up on a map. It's not a huge lake, but it's the lake, and it's between Stamford and Anson, which is right outside of Abilene. The biggest town around there is Abilene, Texas. Abilene's a really cool, rustic town. I always liked Abilene. My dad always worked at power plants, so we lived out in Haskell, Texas. Now, in my hometown of Haskell, there was a legend. And I always, as a child, thought of it as a Bigfoot, like some sort of Bigfoot creature. I lived there till I was like in 3rd or 4th grade. I guess we left. But, it was called the Haskell Rascal. I'm sure you can look it up. This creature was always described, I always thought it was like a Bigfoot, but apparently it's like a short muzzled dogman. Because the more research I've done into it, some of the old accounts of it talk of it as a wiry looking, kind of skinny, Dogman type creature, not a Sasquatch. And it has a muzzle, but it's kind of a short muzzle. It's weird. And I know it's got these pointy ears. It's got to be a Dogman. So I was really, really curious when I put the word out, the last time that I was talking to my friend from my childhood. And he said, you know what? I do know somebody who had an encounter. And he said it was my uncle and his friend. Well, eventually he got back with me because I kept kind of hounded him about it, but eventually he got back with me and he said, dude, it wasn't my uncle. It was my uncle's friend. My uncle knows the story. Tried talking to his uncle. He couldn't really tell me a whole lot. So he got me in touch with his friend, which took a while. And then when I began to talk to this guy, his accent was so thick. Now I'm from Texas, guys, and y'all know some people think I have an accent. Some people say I don't. I have a little bit of a drawl. I've worked on it. I live in Austin. It's very cosmopolitan here. There's not most people in Austin. When people come to Austin, they're like, wow, you guys don't really talk like you're from Texas. But most other places in Texas, they do talk like this. Well, this guy's accent was so bad. It was hard to try to talk to this guy. And, it's also hard to talk to somebody who's trying to watch a NASCAR race. That was another thing that was aggravating about this dude, because he wasn't overburdened with an abundance of education, obviously, and he was kind of aggravating me, but I stuck with it, folks. I got you the story. But anyway, I let him go a couple times and finally got back to him when he wasn't fighting with his family or whatever he was doing. They had some kind of meatloaf dispute going on. I don't know. Anyways, I finally got this guy to tell me his story. And then he asked me what it was for, and I told him that I collect these stories and that if I could use it on the air. He said, I don't give a crap, whatever. So, anyways, guy's name is Wade. Doesn't care if I use his name. Anyway, this happened out of Lake Stanford. Him and his buddy were out on their boat fishing. And it was near dusk. They made that perfectly clear that it was near dusk, that it was almost dark, that it was 8 o'clock in the summertime. He told me this very many times that that's when it was. So I know that much. And then he told me that they were in a shallow cove on the east side of the lake. They were on the east side of the lake near a shallow cove. And he said that on that part of the lake, they had kind of hunkered down and they heard a splashing noise, something like kind of like moving, jumping around. And now there's people that live close to the lake. And I mean, maybe it was somebody's dog, they thought. And they said that when they looked on the edge of that little inlet, he said they saw something splashing. So they moved the boat closer. They had the engine off, so they just kind of let it drift over there, or they pushed it or whatever. I don't know exactly how they got there, but he told me that they moved the boat over there. They didn't turn the engine on. So he said that they got up close to it, to where they were within about 40 yards of it. And he said that they knew at that point that it wasn't a dog. They didn't know what it was, but they just sat there observing it for a few minutes. And then he said that this thing kind of flipped around like it was trying to catch fish or something. And he said that the water was pretty shallow at that point, that it was during the drought. And he said that when they drifted closer and closer, the thing took notice of them. And he said that at that point they realized just how shallow the water was because this thing stood up. And he said when it stood up, it was just up to about where its knees were. So I couldn't confirm the legs. I couldn't confirm what kind of Dogman this was, what this thing was. But the close proximity to Haskell, anything in that area, it's the rascal. It's what they call it. This thing stood up and then it just kind of stared at him. He said it was just covered in mud. It was ugly as heck. And he said that the face of this thing, and he described it, it had a muzzle, kind of a short face. He said he saw it turn its head side to side and look around. And he said that when it saw him, it stood there for a minute, and then it just started to run toward them, like coming toward them in the water, and that it eventually got to where the water was a little bit deeper, and it started to swim quickly toward them. And he said that they were starting up the boat, and they were trying to get the heck out of there. And he said that the boat had a pretty good engine on it, so that they outpaced it. They began to get out of there. And he said, but at its closest, it probably got within maybe, 15 yards of them. And he said that he goes, I was so scared. He goes, I thought, man, this thing is going to get up on our boat. It's going to capsize us. It's going to drown us. It's going to kill us. He said, I didn't know what it was going to do to us. Now, he said that this thing followed them all the way across the lake. He said they got to the other side of the lake. He said that they pulled the boat up onto the shore. They ran to the truck, which wasn't far from where they pulled the boat up. And he said that this thing was still pursuing them. And he said that when this thing had first gotten into the water, I forgot to tell you about this part. When he first got into the water, he said that this thing was making a guttural grunting noise. Now, I told you about that, Vic. And he said that the thing was going like, that's the best way that he could describe it. And I'm trying to reenact it the best way that he told me. And he said that when it did that, that after it was about halfway across the lake, he started to hear an answer from different sides of the lake, that there was more of these things. And like he heard one across the lake and another one on the other side where they were at, where they were headed. And he thought, oh my God, this thing's calling friends. And he said that then he began to hear these weird shrieking howls coming from the wood, the little bit of wood area where he was at, when he got up onto the shore. He said there was some brush right there, and he said he heard it coming out of the brush. And he thought, oh my God, we're going to get attacked. We're going to be driving out here. This thing's going to attack us. He said, we just left the boat. We just left it there and we just burned off. And he said that eventually he looked back in the rearview mirror and it was just starting to get up out of the water. Like he could see it clearly. And he said that one thing he remembered about the face of this thing was that he don't remember which side of the face it was, but he said he remembered part of the muzzle of the thing being kind of ripped or torn. He said that you could see more of the teeth on that side, like there was something that had happened to its face, like it had been in a fight or something. That's what he said. And he said this thing looked freaking just gnarly. That was his exact words. He said it was the weirdest, gnarliest looking creature. He said, I don't know what that thing was, dude. And I said, did it bring to mind a werewolf? He said, a werewolf or just a hairy devil. He said it was just something out of a comic book. That was his description of it. And who knows with this guy what kind of comic books he's reading. But anyways, that's his description of it. And that happened at Lake Stanford. So if anybody knows where that's at in Texas. Moving on down the list here, I got another story for you, Vic. This one came out of Dallas. Now, this is a security guard that a former security guard that I used to know got me in touch with this guy. He had an encounter. This happened in 2015. And he said that it was in a subdivision near Dallas. He was working for a very large company at that time, or maybe he still does. I don't know. But he said that he had a patrol route and that he had a trainee. And he said that they were having problems on one of the subdivisions with vandalism. Now, he said it had been raining a lot and that he had gone into one of the buildings the last night before he had his trainee. He said they went into one of the buildings and that he almost stepped in what he thought was dog crap. But he said that this was a humongous pile of dung. Like he was like, that's the biggest scat I've ever seen in my life. Not his words, mine, but he said that it was huge. And he was like, oh my God, what kind of Great Dane or what is that? And he said that the building, they were all shells at that point. They had the Tyvek wrap on them, just the shell. None of the drywall was put up. But he said that something had been in there because he said it smelled like a wet dog mixed with pee and maybe blood. Because he said he smelled iron in the air, and I'm thinking maybe that's blood. I don't know. That's my words, but he said it smelled like urine, wet dog, and garbage. That's classic. Now, I did lead him a little bit. I asked him, I said, did you smell like a rotting smell? And he said, yes. So it wasn't like he just came out and told me that. I asked him because I wanted to know, because I need to know if these people are being honest. So anyways, he tells me this story. He said that that was the last night that he was without a partner. And he said that he walked out of the building and he was thinking, man, I don't know what kind of dogs are coming up in here. But there had been reports that there was some broken lumber and some beams had been snapped. So they thought vandalism. Maybe bums were going in there sleeping and just being drunk and tearing stuff up. They didn't know. So he had a partner. He was training him for the routes because he hadn't had a day off in 2 weeks, he said. So he was glad to have a guy that was going to train. So they went through that same subdivision out on the edge of town. I think he said it was northeast of Dallas. And he said that they went into one of the buildings and they were checking it and then they heard a noise in the next building. He said, maybe there's something over there. He said, well, I'll check this building. You check that building, because they didn't know exactly where it was coming from, but they heard a beam of wood or something fall. So he went into the next building. The partner went into the other building, and he said that the partner was in the other building and he heard him scream, just scream. And he said he saw him come running out of the building and just was running toward the truck and was like, we gotta go, we gotta go. And he's like, why? So he kind of walked out of the building slowly, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know why we were running. He looked in the window and he saw this brownish black creature standing there looking like hunched down, I guess, to look out the window. And he said that it looked like a werewolf, like a literal werewolf was standing there looking at him. And he thought, I am staring at a werewolf. He's like, there's no other way to describe it. This looks like a quintessential werewolf. Quintessential, my word, but that's what he said. He said it just looked like a classic werewolf. And he said that he just ran to his truck. They got in the truck. It was raining and they took off. And he said that they got down the street. They pulled into an IHOP and they called the police. They told them that they think maybe there was some homeless people there because they didn't know what to tell the cop. And they had decided that they weren't going to tell the cop that they saw a werewolf. So they called police and the cop was like, okay, we'll go check it out. Nothing came of it. I guess they didn't find anything. But he said that they'd spent the night talking about it all night. And he said that the partner told him part of it that night, but then the next day, when they were going back out to do their patrol, they had talked about it, whether they were even going to go and do it. And he said they both agreed they needed the job, but that they weren't going to stop and look inside that. They were just going to drive through. And he said eventually they lost that account because the guards quit checking in those places. and whatever it was continued to be a menace, I guess, and destroy things. What I suspect was that this thing had taken up residence there while it was raining, maybe just to get out of the rain, and it was laying in there. Now, here's what his partner told him, and this is what he told me his partner said. He said that as he walked into the building, he said he smelled that nasty wet dog, that dank wet dog smell mixed with like garbage or whatever. And he said that he knew right then, he said that it just hit him that there was something there. And he said that he heard a snoring, like something was snoring. And he thought, oh my God, there's bums in here. You know, there's homeless people in here. His exact words were like, he thought there were a couple bums in there or something. But he said it was loud, that he could hear almost like a heartbeat. And he thought, dude, there's this, whatever this is, it's big, you know, it's a big person. And he said he yelled security, and he shined his flashlight toward the back behind a pile of lumber. And he said that this thing, he saw an arm first come up and then a head pop up. And he said that when the head popped up, he got the shock of his life because it was a wolf's head. And he said it was gigantic, dude. He said this thing's head was giant, dude. And he said this thing just kind of leaped up to its feet and just was kind of crouched down. And he said that it was like crouched down behind the lumber with both of its arms on top of the lumber, leaned forward like it was sniffing the air. And it just stared right at him. And he said its shoulders were bristled up and it was hiked up like a dog that was getting ready to pounce. And he said that it began to peel its lips back and like a growl. And that it began to growl at him. And he said at that point he thought, oh my God, this thing is about to attack me. I'm about to be killed in this building. So he said at that point he turned and he ran out of the building and didn't look back. And he said that that's when, I guess, the partner came out and he saw it in the window. But that was pretty terrifying. And he said that they went over it. He said that he didn't give them all the details the first day, but the next day he remembered more. And he said that they went over the story about 10 times. He's like, I just didn't know what to make of it. I don't know what it was. But a guy that I knew from security knows that I collect these stories about the paranormal. This story came out of Westlake. I'm going to go back to Austin here, my hometown here. My second hometown. My hometown's Taylor, but, you know, Austin's my home. So this guy, I don't know this kid personally, but he knew that I was from Austin and he gave me his story. Now it's kind of a short one, but it's pretty crazy. He was coming back from the theater one night, the Paramount, him and his girlfriend, and they live out in Westlake. He was young, still lived with his mom and dad and his girlfriend. They were driving back to his girlfriend's house. She was 20. He was 19 when this happened. So they were young. They're still living at their parents' house. Now he said this happened a few years back, but he said that his mother had an encounter of this weird looking creature that she observed while she was jogging, which is really scary. She was jogging and then up in them back hills over there. Nobody's thinking, hey, there's a Bigfoot or a Dogman or a gargoyle out there. Nobody's thinking that someone's going to jump out and attack you. You're just going to go run. It's a beautiful place and people are going to go and jog and hike and do what they do. Austin is a very fit city. It's a very scenic city. People like to exercise. They like to exercise outdoors. Nobody's thinking that there's something out there. Well, there is. So she was jogging along. As she was jogging, she heard kind of a splash down in the creek bed. She looked, she saw this thing sitting on the edge of the creek, and she said it was gray. She said it was probably about 6.5 feet tall because it stood up and it just stared at her. And she said that it looked just like a timber wolf standing on its hind legs with like shoulders. The front paws were kind of like hands. And she said that she just kept running. She just pretended like she didn't see it, and she sped up and took off running. And she said it didn't move. It just kind of watched her. And she looked back a couple of times, and it was just still there. And she said there were cars going by, too. But you would have to look down in that gully or whatever to see that this thing was there. But he said that him and his girlfriend were coming back from the Paramount one night. I don't remember exactly. He's still a young guy, so I don't remember what it was. I think he said that they had gone to see a comedian or something, Jim Gaffigan or something. So anyway, they were coming back. And he said that his girlfriend was like, oh my God, what was that? And she said he looked and this thing stepped out in front of their SUV and was just about to run across the road when he thought we're going to hit it. And then he said it just kind of leaped backwards, like just jumped back. And he said they slammed on the brakes and were kind of turning or whatever. Now I told him, I said, and I know this because I hit a deer not too long ago. And I said, dude, you don't swerve. Don't ever do that. You're going to hit the dog, man. You're going to hit it. He said, dude, if it was a deer, I would have just kept, but he goes, this thing, I didn't want to hit it. He goes, it was gray, like the color of a gray wolf, like a timber wolf, with a big head. It had the classic legs. He said it had the backward legs like a dog has. And he said it jumped back. And he said that he looked, they had kind of slid and then they got back control and they just both looked over to the right and they saw it standing there and it just kind of backed up to the tree line. It was just staring at him and it had its arms like out in front of it. And he said that as soon as they saw it, it just kind of like hid. And then they turned around the curve right there. I know exactly where it's at. I've been to that spot. It's like a curve, And he said that then they saw it just kind of get down on all fours and run across the road. He goes, but it was on its hind legs. He said that for a couple days after that, he would smell this weird, like musky smell, as he described it, like a wet dog, like it was around his house. Now that was weird because he said that it seemed like this thing knew that it was him that did it, And maybe it was his imagination, like he even admitted it. I said, maybe you were just imagining that this thing was after you. He goes, I don't know, man. He goes, I'd go out on my deck and I'd feel like the thing was there in the tree line watching me because I had seen it. My mom had seen it. And then he goes, and then I found out a few months down the road that another neighboring family had seen it too. So there's that story. For the next story, I'm going to take you to my hometown. This one happened. I had two of them from my hometown, but I can't give you both of them because the one person, she doesn't want the story being told, and I'm going to respect that. She gave me the story, but I can't tell you. It's like putting handcuffs on me, and especially with me because I like to talk. I got a big mouth. So here goes. This story now, this girl that told me this story, went to high school with her. Well, she's a little older than me. I think I would have been like a freshman when she was a senior, but she really don't remember me when I was a freshman, but she knows who I am. She knows my family and everything. But anyways, they lived out on the edge of town. It would be in the south side of Taylor. And she said that her mother, kind of sad, her mother was an abused woman and her dad was an alcoholic. He would get drunk and he would hit her. And so one night the mom had had enough and they decided to leave. They had to leave in the middle of the night because he was on one of his binges and he was beating her. And so she got out, she grabbed the kids and they ran him. Now it was just her and her little brother. And they were walking across a bridge that goes across this place called Mustang Creek. When they were walking across that bridge, of course the mom's crying, they're crying. It's a traumatic thing. It's sad, broken families. They got halfway across the bridge and the little brother, I guess, was looking down into the creek and he says, what is that? Now she said that they turned all at the same time and they see this black shape. At first they didn't know what it was. It was just a black shape down in the creek bed. She said that when they stared at it a little closer, she said that her little brother had a flashlight, but it wasn't a real good one, but it illuminated it enough to where they could see that it was using like its hand to lap water. But she said the odd thing was it looked like a wolf. It was black or smoky black gray, the same exact description as mine. Might have been mine. Who knows? Right around the same time. And she said that it was really tall, probably about 7 feet tall because it stood up for a minute and then got back down. And she said it kind of crawled around in a circle and then it began to jog toward the bridge. So then they're standing there and they're like, oh my God, they just left this horrible situation to go to her aunt's house. And now they're having to run and they're dropping their clothes and everything else. And this thing gets to the bridge. And she said it was about 15 to 20 feet. I know where that's at. Now, depending upon which part of the bridge you're on, it's about 20 feet at its highest, maybe 15. You go further down, it's about 10, and so on and so forth. But she said that it ran toward the middle of the bridge, and she said the next thing you know, this thing is up on the bridge, and it's running behind them on the sidewalk. And she said you could hear the footfall like slap, slap, slap on the ground. And she said that it was shaking the ground. It was so heavy. And she said this thing probably weighed 400 or 500 pounds. She said it was just enormous. They turned around and you could see it. Like she said, you could just see it. And she said that it was, I think she said it was wintertime. I'm not for sure what time of the year. I had it written down, but I can't find the note on it. But she said that you could see its breath. And she said that it was just horrifying creature. And she said that it was like you could hear it breathing, and she said that when you look back, the eyes were glowing red. They were red. I said, "Are you sure they were red?" She said, "Absolutely. This thing's eyes were red." And she said it was coming toward us. And she said that you could see the chest heaving. She said it wasn't even that far away, but she said that luckily the aunt's house was just right there. And when they got into the neighbor's yard, they were screaming and crying, and the neighbors came outside. And she said this wasn't but like 9 o'clock at night. And she said that the aunt and everybody came out, and they ran in the house, and they were looking out, and they didn't see it. They don't know where it went. She said that she thinks it veered off, but she said that it got pretty close to them. And she couldn't even tell me exactly how close, because in her mind it was so terrifying. And so anyway, that was her story. And I had been trying to get a good time to talk to her, and I finally was able to get this story from her. That was a pretty terrifying encounter. And now I know what it was, because she said that, I could tell you in person, it'd be better if I told you on the phone or whatever, because she couldn't really relay it to me in a message. And then I have another story. Now, this I wasn't even going to put on here, but this is a bonus story. And this is the last one of the night, guys. My voice is, I'm hanging in here with my voice. This happened in 1979 in a little bitty spot outside of my hometown called Nowak. Now, a friend of mine I grew up with, well, he was a lot older than me. He's about 10 years older than me, but I know him very well. And he told me this story. When he was a kid, I think he said in 1979 he was 10. So I guess he was born in 1969. He's, I guess, I'm trying to think, maybe 6 years older than me. So he told me that when he was a kid, and I made a special trip out there to talk to him in person, he said that him and his dad and his little brother were leaving Randy's ice house. And he said that, now this is what I found out, his little brother was in the passenger seat and his dad was in the middle seat. And he was driving. Now he said he was like 10, 11 years old. Now, that's not so unusual in these country towns. His dad got lit and was like, "You know what, you drive, son." So he drove him home. Now, believe me, that happens. I've done that with my dad before. But they were driving out near Nowak, where he was from, out there in the country. See, at first I thought that he was in the passenger seat and his dad was driving, but no, I talked to him and he said, no, I was driving. So that's what happened. But he said that they were driving down these backcountry roads, and I know exactly where this place is at too. And he said his little brother pointed out the window and said, "Look, a dog." And when him and his dad and his little brother look out the window, they look a little closer and they see that this isn't a dog. This is some sort of weird looking creature crawling up underneath the barbed wire fence. Now, he said when a coyote or a coy wolf or a dog or anything, it kind of arches its back and kind of slides up under. He said this thing looked like it pulled the barbed wire and was going through it or under it. He said he couldn't get a real good look to see exactly how it was doing it. But he said it came up from out of the barbed wire, and he said that it stood up. And he said that it was real stocky and that it was grayish looking, but he said that it could have just been illuminated by the light of the moon. And he said that when it noticed the truck, that it got down on all fours and began to head straight for him. And he said that the way the curves were, this thing was moving as the crow flies. So they were having to take the road, but this thing was cutting across. And he said that it was almost up to the truck. And he said that he began to speed up. And his dad was like, "Go, go, go." And he was like, I didn't want to go too much faster because I was going to lose control. I was a little kid. And he said that this thing got right up next to the truck and began to run on all fours, standing up on its hind legs and then back on all fours. And it was just looking in the window. And he said that it didn't have like a menacing look on its face. He said it looked like it had almost like a curious look on its face. Like when it was running alongside the truck, that it was looking in the cab and that it was almost like looking in. He said that its tongue was hanging out. You know how when a dog gets tired, its tongue is hanging out? And he said he was going about 45, 50 miles as fast as he could, trying to maintain control. And this thing was keeping up. But then he said that eventually they got down a straightaway and they just gunned it. And then it just kind of lost interest and veered off to the side of the road. And he said then it just stood up and he saw it like barking and howling and making noise. I don't know what that is. I mean, that could be a territorial thing. It saw them. It decided to chase it. I don't know. Dogs chase cars. I don't know. It was a weird story and he told me that. And so I tell you what, man, These are some weird creatures, dude.
Episode 170, Angela Odell.
Actually, it started with Poncho, my horse. He thought he was the Casanova of the mountain, and he wasn't. He was a gelding, but he had many a girlfriend in probably a 3-mile radius of my home. And I have oil derricks on my property, which means the oil guys come in at least once a day, and they have to check everything and do what they have to do. And it was a long-running fight with the oil men because they would open my gate to pull their big trucks in and leave it open while they're doing their work and then close it as they leave. Well, my horse knew. He knew this, and he was a master escape artist, and he would hide in the woods right there by the gate, wait for them to come in, and then he would be out the gate and gone. And so a lot of times I spent a lot of time and a lot of walking trying to find this horse. And this particular day, I took the dogs out. I had 3 dogs. I have a Rottweiler named Jewel, a Pit Bull named Rosie, and a Doberman named Jake. And I would take the dogs every day and we would go walking. And so I took them and we went walking and trying to find the horse, and we walked and we couldn't find Poncho anywhere. So I gave up for the day because I figured, okay, he's gotten into somebody's pasture. And some of those pastures, people have 100, 200 acres. And that's a lot of pasture to walk, try to find this horse. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to stop for tonight. I'll look for him tomorrow. And next morning, I got the dogs out and we went back on our walk. And I usually walk down the driveway, which, like I said, was about a quarter mile. And then if you turn right onto the gravel road and walk about 2.5 miles, that takes you to the highway. And that was our normal walk when we would take our walks every day. We did that the day before and we didn't find him. So I turned down another road because I knew these other neighbors, they had about 10 horses, and sometimes he would go visit them. And so I got down there, and sure enough, I seen Poncho out in their pasture with their mares. And so I hopped the fence and started walking towards him. He seen me and started coming to me. He's a big baby, and yes, I did spoil him rotten. But I'm about 5'1", and he's 13 hands. He was good 750-pound horse. He's a big guy. And I noticed when he was coming towards me, he was walking really slow. He looked like, when you've been on a long ride with a horse and they're just total sweat on their body. That's how he was. His whole body was coated with sweat. And I thought, what in the world have you been doing? And I noticed as I'm walking up to him that his back left leg, he was kind of limping on it a little bit. And I thought, oh, Lord. Okay. So I got up to him, and bless his heart, he was coated in sweat, and he immediately, as big as he is, he still liked me to hold him. And his way for me to hold him was to put his head on my shoulder and just wrap around, like I'm holding him like a big baby. And so I did, and I loved on him a bit, and so I started walking around him to check him out. And I got to the back side and I started seeing the blood. And a lot of blood. I got to looking at his butt cheeks and it was just coated with blood. His tail was coated with blood, and it looked like on both sides of his behind there was like claw marks. Like something tried to jump on the back side of him, and it was just down both sides. So I walked on around to check out that left leg, and he had a little bit of a cut on it, but not bad enough that it would have caused him to be limping like that. So I'm thinking to myself, whatever got him, he must have kicked the crud out of this thing, and that's how he hurt his leg. I really wasn't sure. But I was really concerned and really worried about him, and it took us probably a good hour and a half to walk him back home because I had to take so many breaks with him because he was not good. And I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to get him home. And, of course, my husband was at work. My kids were at school. It was just me. And so we just took our time, and I gave him water breaks, and I finally got him home. And I took him in his pen and got out the water hose and set to bathing him down to try to get this sweat and some of this blood off of him so I could see what I was dealing with. Because there was just so much caked blood, I couldn't really see what I was dealing with. And I got him washed down, and I mean, on his backside, I mean, it was just deep, deep scratches, like somebody just jumped on him and then just ripped back. And his leg was okay, but I went ahead and wrapped the bottom part of it, and I called his vet, had the vet come out and look at him, and he couldn't tell me. He just got attacked from something. I can't really tell you for sure what it was. And I was really worried that he was so bad that they were going to try to talk me into putting him down. And he did warn me that we might have to put him down. And I was like, well, we're going to give him a chance first. So he gave me some medicines, antibiotics and stuff, and I put this swab on his wound and fed him, put him back in his pen. I was, okay, you're going to stay in your pen this time. And I thought about it, and I was like, I'm going to go see if I can find tracks or see if I can find blood spots, you know, try to figure out what did this to my horse. So I took the dogs and we went walking, and I bet you I walked for a good 3.5, 4 hours up and down gravel road through people's pastures and stuff, trying to find something to help me figure this out. And I didn't ever find any tracks, but I did find a big blood spatter in the gravel road. And at first immediately I thought, oh my God, did he get hit from a truck? And then I was like, no, because that don't add up. This is claw marks. I've seen a horse get hit by a truck, and it's very messy and very sad. But whatever happened, I found the spot where the main fight was. And that was a good, I'm going to say, 1,000 feet, 1,500 feet from these people's pasture that I found him in. So anyway, I gave up. I went home and just tried to comfort him and keep an eye on him for the next few days and what have you. And it was probably about 3 days later, I didn't get to do my walk that day. Normally, like I say, I get up in the mornings and me and the dogs, you know, walk about 5 miles down the gravel road back and around. But sometimes when it's really hot in the summertime or if it's not too cold and I've missed walking that day, then I'll take the dogs and we'll go walking at night because I've never felt any kind of fear. I wasn't worried about the Bigfoot. Yeah, they followed me sometimes, but they've never been aggressive or I just felt like they were curious. So I didn't worry about them. So anyway, it was about 9 o'clock at night. This was in October. It was a beautiful, beautiful, clear night, full moon. And, you know, sometimes when it's a full, big, beautiful moon, it'll light up outside just almost like day. And this was one of those nights. It was bright out. I regress. I was a little worried when I took the dogs walking because I took my gun with me this time. I have a .380. I just stuck it in my jacket pocket just in case because I didn't know what that was that attacked Ponch. And even though, like I said, I had 3 big dogs, just for my own safety, okay, I'm going to take my gun. So we take off down my driveway. And it was kind of weird because if you live out in the country, you're used to all these night sounds. The animals, the insects. That's one thing I loved about the country was the night sound. Well, this particular night, it was quiet. It was so quiet, like pin drop quiet. And I thought, that's just weird. But I just let it go and just kept walking down the drive. I got about 3/4 of the way down my driveway, and my dogs kept trying to turn me around to head back home. And I thought, you lazy dogs. No, I'm going on my walk. Either you go or head back home. And I just kept walking. And yeah, I didn't notice that they were acting weird. I just thought, yeah, they just don't want to walk and they want to go home. Well, I got to the end of my drive and I turned right, like on my normal route. And I made it about, I'd say 25, 30 feet. And my Rottweiler, Jewel, she reached up and literally grabbed my hand in her mouth and tried to turn me around like a child and head me back home. She'd never done anything like that before. And I'm sitting there getting onto her, and I look down, and my pit, Rosie, is looking behind me, shaking, and just pees all over herself. And I look over at Jake, and he's looking behind me, and he's just shaking. And here's Jewel, still got my hand in her mouth. She wouldn't let it go, trying to tug me. Let's go back to the house. Well, just about that time, Jake and Rosie took off and left us. They were gone. They were up and gone, and it was just me and Jewel. And about that time, something came over me. It's really hard to explain. I've never had a fear like that before in my life. You know, I've been scared of a lot of stuff, but it was this intense fear that just hit me. And I just knew something was behind us. And I hate to say it, but when that happened, I think me and Jewel kind of wet ourselves. And I didn't want to turn around and look. I kind of froze for a minute because I wasn't sure what to do. And I took my hand away from Jewel, and I grabbed her collar with my left hand, and I stuck my right hand in my coat pocket and grabbed hold of my gun. And I casually, very slowly, like I was just going to turn around and go home, started turning around. And when I looked up, there was something blocking out the moon and yellow eyes. Now, I have to explain, my neighbor's property is raised up probably about 4 foot above where the gravel road is. And then you have the fence, and then this thing was standing right there at the fence. Okay? And it shocked me at first. I didn't know what I was seeing because I was used to the Bigfoot. They are big and very broad. I mean, like football player broad. And this thing wasn't. It shocked me so bad, Vic, that I just kind of stood there frozen for a minute, and I'm looking at this thing, and I noticed that it's got tall ears like wolf ears. And it looks like it had a long muzzle, and I'm thinking wolf. But then I'm thinking this cannot be a wolf because this thing is standing on 2 feet. I was shocked. Truthfully, I didn't know what to do. And I'm just standing there, and I'm looking at this thing, and it's looking at me, and then all of a sudden I hear this low growl. It wasn't I'm going to eat you growl. It was just kind of like, and I never seen teeth. I couldn't tell you what its teeth looked like or just that growl. And its body was, this is how I didn't think it was a Bigfoot, because they're so big and broad, and this thing was like lean and sculpted. I mean, it was big up the top at the chest, but it tapered down lean in the waist like a 6-pack or something. And it was really pretty skinny. Of course, as you go on down to the bottom, you know, this was no Bigfoot. And I knew. And when it growled, I sit there, I looked at it for a few seconds longer, and I casually turned Jewel the rest of the way around, and we started walking away. I started walking towards my driveway, and I did not look back. I was too scared to look back. I thought, if this thing is going to get me, it's going to get me regardless. And truthfully, I don't want to see it head on. And I thought at the time, I'm a hunter, know about hunting, know about prey. And in my head, I kept saying on and on in my head, don't run, don't run, don't run. But that's all I wanted to do was run. But somehow I didn't, because I'm thinking, show this thing strength. Don't be a crying, screaming, running woman, because it's going to get you. So I don't know how I did it, but I casually walked away from this thing, and not one time did I look back. Now, Jewel looked back a lot. She was so scared and so nervous, and I just kept walking. I got about halfway down my driveway, and there were my other two dogs waiting for me. And they were so happy to see us and hopping around and jumping around, and Jewel just looked relieved. Just this look of relief on her face. And I'm talking to them, and I'm trying to pet her, and that's when I noticed I hear the night sound. I hear the insects, the critters in the woods. The quietness was gone. Well, I got the dogs. We walked the rest of the way down the driveway. I went in the house. I brought all three big dogs in the house, which is something I normally don't do. And I kept them in all that night. And yeah, I made it home. I wasn't sure if I was going to make it home, but I did. And the first thing I did when I got the dogs in the house was, like I say, something I never do. Most people live out in the country. We don't lock our doors. We just don't. We're country folk. I walked in the door and I locked that front door. I about ran to my back laundry room door to lock that door. And then after I knew I was safe, it all came out. Then I just started crying and shaking. And my husband come out of the bedroom and he's like, Angie, what's wrong? And, I told him, I said, you're not going to believe me. I just seen a werewolf. And he looked at me like, no. And I'm like, I'm serious, Calvin. I've never seen anything like this in my life. And bless his heart, he's one of those types that he's got to see to believe. But he did see how scared I was. He couldn't help from seeing that. And I tell you, because of that following day, I was calling ADT security. I had them come out and put in a whole security system in my house. I called an electrician. I had them come out and put in one of those big light poles in my backyard and put one by my animal pens. Yeah, it really did a number on me. It really did. But that was my encounter.
Episode 171, Dan.
My wife was going to take my son and daughter to go visit my sister-in-law. And she knew that I was going to be bored if I went with her. So she suggested that I go out with one of my buddies and do something so I can get out of the house and have some fun. So I contacted my friend Ron, who was also a retired policeman. And I asked him, I said, hey, do you want to go camping and hiking? He goes, yeah, sure. So we loaded up the trucks and we went into the Santa Cruz Mountains where Ron had the knowledge of the area and he also knew a good place to set up camp. So we went up in there and parked and unloaded our gear and stuff and set up camp. Ron said that there was a pond that was east of the location where we were. And he said that wildlife used to go there all the time and they used to go there to drink. So it'd be a good place to view some wildlife. So I said, okay, I'm going to go hike up the trail and see what I could see. So I got my binoculars and I started hiking up the trail from the campground. And as I was getting close, I was hiking eastbound on the trail. And I was getting close to the lake, but then before I got there, I noticed that there was a meadow down below where I was hiking. And I noticed a movement in the meadow. And I said, oh, this is interesting. And this is between 5 and 6 o'clock in the evening. It started to get dusk. I took my binoculars out and I looked down in the meadow and I saw a large mule deer that had been taken down by 2 wolves. And these were very large wolves. And as I'm looking at this, the binoculars, it hit me, and I thought, wait a minute. There's no wolves in California. There haven't been timber wolves in California for decades. The only wolves in California that are still here are the Mexican red wolf that's down in San Diego County, and that's seen very rarely. But there they were, 2 large black wolves eating on this deer carcass. And I said, well, I'm going to get closer and try to get a better look at these. So I started going further up the trail and saw this large pine tree that I thought would be a good advantage to watch them. And I got behind the pine tree, and as I did so, I stepped on a branch and it went crack. And it alerted the creatures down in the meadow because they brought their heads up and they're looking around. And I said, oh, crap, so all of a sudden, to my horror, one of them actually stood up on his hind legs. I almost crapped right there. It was huge. It was about 7 feet tall, and both of the creatures were covered in black, silver-tipped hair all over the bodies. They both had large, black, bushy tails. The one that stood up was just huge, had big, huge chest. But then I noticed that the legs were man-like. They were not dog-like at all. Large and muscular. Had very long arms, not paws, had arms. Man-like hands that had claws coming out the edge of the hands. I was thinking, oh my gosh, it's a werewolf. That's the only thing that came to mind that registered at the time. It was sniffing the air, trying to, I think, locate where I was. And it was growling. I could hear it growl. And I could actually see with my binoculars the blood of the deer on its muzzle. And had ears on the top of its head, just like a wolf. And like I said, I've been an outdoorsman my entire life. Hunter, hiker. I know what the animals of the forest look like. I've never seen anything like this before, ever. And standing on its legs like that, I was terrified. And I actually got my weapon out, my off-duty weapon, and I put it down to my right side. And Ron started coming up the trail behind me. And I told him, I said, hey, be quiet. Get your binoculars out and look down in there and tell me what you see. So he got up to my location, and he took his binoculars out, and he looked down in there, and he said, what the is that? I said, what do you think that is? I said, that's a couple of werewolves. I said, they took down that deer buck, and they were eating it when I came up on them. And all of a sudden, as we're talking, the creature took 2 steps toward us. And I said, oh, crap. That's when I knew that it had honed in on us, and it was actually looking at me and Ron. And I told Ron, I said, get your gun out. I said, put it down to your side. And Ron did that. And the creature was growling, and you could hear it. It was like echoing through the meadow. The other creature never got up. It just continued to eat on the deer carcass, but it would lift its head up once in a while to see what was going on. And I guess it was just extra hungry and didn't take an interest in us since the other one was. And then when he did that, when he took 2 steps toward us, we got in a ready position to open fire if he came any closer to us. And I actually told Ron, if he takes 1 more step towards us, we're going to light him up. And Ron said, okay. So we're out there and we've got our guns pointed directly at it, and it's staring directly at us. And the anger and the hate in this creature's eyes, you could just feel it. Okay. And I'm scared. Okay. I'm not scared of much, but I'm scared. The back of my neck and the hairs on my arms are just standing straight up. And all of a sudden, for no unknown reasons, they both turned their heads and they looked westward. I don't know what was out there that got their attention. If they got signaled by somebody, I don't know. And then the one that was standing got back on all fours The other one was already on all fours, and they ran across the meadow and then into the forest to the north of the meadow and out of sight. And then Ron looked at me and he said, "Let's get the hell out of here." And I said, "Yes." So we didn't walk. We ran back to the camp, packed it up, got the stuff in the truck, and we got out of there. And on the way out down the trail, we actually heard a loud wolf howl, and I think it was probably about a quarter mile away. I'm guessing distances. As we drove out, we got out of there and we went home. And that was my encounter.
And tonight's last encounter is from episode 173, Flynn.
This happened, from what my memory can serve me, it was either November 1997 or November 1998. Me and my girlfriend were in my Beetle, I believe it was. There are some questions in my mind that it could possibly have been a BMW I had at the time, but I do believe it was my Beetle. It was an old Beetle. It's a 1967, so I'm sure people listening know what they look like. We were parked in a car park which is outside a small hall called Usk Memorial Hall. This is off Maryport Street, which is in Usk. We'd been there for probably 20 minutes or so chatting. And this was a regular place where we would go. Our friends all knew where it was, so we would park up and know for a while without even making a phone call. Friends would come and join us after a while. It was a place where we regularly hung out. So we'd been chatting for about 20 minutes and the windows started to get steamed up a little because it was cold outside. And I don't want to give the impression it was because of other reasons of why it was getting steamed up. It's just because it was cold outside. And unfortunately, my car didn't have heaters. Being a young person, I didn't have much money. I was in college. So I had to make do with what we had. So the windows were starting to steam up. And I noticed a mist come out of nowhere. This kind of not made me feel alert, but I just thought it was peculiar that this mist had just almost appeared out of nowhere. It didn't creep in like mist usually does. It just appeared suddenly. So anyway, we were chatting away about this and that. And after about 20 minutes, whilst talking to my other half, suddenly I felt a bump on my car. Now, my Beetle had work done to it, like many cars or youngsters even today do. They do work on the cars. Everybody, when we were young, we had our cars. I'm sure everybody did it when they want to make their car faster or handle better, whatever it may be. Well, my Beetle had the suspension lowered on it before I bought it, so it had quite a stiff suspension. So to make something rock it, you'd have to give it quite a hard bump. So as we're chatting, I feel this bump. It feels like it came in from the left-hand side. Now, in the UK, bear in mind, we drive on the right-hand side. So I was sat in the driver's seat on the right-hand side. My girlfriend, or ex-girlfriend, sorry, was sat on the left-hand side, in the passenger side. And the bump felt like it came from the left side of the car. And it really rocked the car. As I said, bearing in mind, we've got firm suspension on this car, so it must have been something quite hard. The noise it made wasn't like a stone or something hitting the car, or even like a car hitting the car. It was more of a dull thud, as if something had gone up against the car and pressed against it quite hard. So I've stopped and I've looked over my left shoulder to try and look through the rear passenger window and then the rear window. I can't see anything. I've looked in my rear view mirror, where that if you're looking forwards, you look up to see what vehicle's behind you. I've looked in that, and again, I've seen nothing other than fog outside. I can just about make out the orange glow of street lights because this fog was quite thick. And the next automatic thing for me to do was to look over my right shoulder. I was going to first of all look in the mirror, but as I'm about to turn over my right shoulder, I took a quick glance on my right-hand side to the rear passenger window. And it took a moment or two for me to register what was going on, because I noticed that it was steaming up, or appeared to be steaming, then disappearing quickly, then steaming up and disappearing quickly. Now, this obviously isn't normal actions or normal behaviour for something to happen to a car. The only way I can describe it, and it sounds a bit corny, some people might question it, but the best way I can describe it, Vic, is Jurassic Park, where I don't know which one it's in, but with one of them, there's two children that are in a kitchen, and they see a velociraptor come up to the door of the kitchen, and you see its breath appearing on the window, and it disappears, and then it breathes again. Well, that's exactly what I saw, Vic. So whilst I'm struggling with this in my mind, I am questioning it, but bear in mind, this is all happening within the space of a couple of seconds, Vic. That's the context it's happening with. So as thoughts are going through my mind, I'm also moving and slowly coming from my left to my right, looking, all within a couple of seconds. So I've seen what I believe is something outside the window breathing, and I can make out a bit of a dark shadow. The next thing I know, I look down to my wing mirror. That's my automatic reaction to look in the outside wing mirror, which enables me to look down the side of the car. And when I looked in that, suddenly reality flipped on its head, Vic. it's hard to convey how I felt. It was panic, but it wasn't a panic where I wanted to get out and run or anything like that. It was a panic, Vic, that was just all consuming. And it's one of the very, very few times in my life, Vic, where I honestly was frozen to the spot. I didn't know what to do. Yes, I was just frozen, Vic. Sorry, I was almost in the moment there, Vic, for a moment, and I almost got lost for words picturing this thing again. I'm used to it in my mind. Even after 20 years, it can still creep up on you, and it takes me back to that moment. Yes, I looked in my rearview mirror, and I was met by, the only thing I can describe it was like a werewolf. I'm laughing because even now when I say it, whilst I know it's real, it's almost unbelievable. I laugh because this shouldn't exist. This shouldn't have been happening. At the time, I didn't laugh. It was absolutely terrifying. So I'm looking out in my rearview mirror to the right, and I'm met with what I can only describe as looked a bit like a very tall, skinny Alsatian, but it was arching up in the manner of, I suppose, almost like a cartoon or a Tim Burton film. When you see the films that Tim Burton has made, when he has cats in them, they always look like they're scared and they have the big arch in their back. Well, this looked like it was arching, almost trying to tuck itself into the side of the car. With hindsight, it was probably trying to make itself appear smaller. I could be wrong, but that's how it looked in my head. I think I've sent some pictures to you, Vic, which are what I felt is the closest thing to what this thing that I saw is. And it was a mix between those. There's a black and white picture that I've sent you. The body looked a lot like that animal or that werewolf in that picture. However, the thing I saw was covered in white hair from head to tail. It did have a tail. I'll explain as I go on now how I knew that. But it was covered from head to toe in white fur that had hints of grey or silver on the tips of it. And just underneath in the chest area, it looked a little darker. Not that it was more grey, but I think it was maybe where it was dirty when you see some dogs and where they've been lying down, if they're white fur and they lie down and moving around eating food. After a while, they start to get that darker fur around their mouth and down their chest, and it looked like that. But the head of this thing was almost elongated, and I think, again, I've sent you a picture for it, Vic, of this white werewolf that I found online, and the head looked almost identical, Vic. The first time I saw this picture, which was, goodness me, about 8 months ago, I just happened to be scanning through the internet, and it was because my other half was watching a film called Underworld. I hadn't seen it, but if I'm honest, she mentioned that Kate Beckinsale was in it. So that's why I started looking for a review to see what it was like. I'd heard of it mentioned, but due to the fact I've got children, I don't get to sit down and watch television much. I'm relegated to the iPad or to books. So I was flicking through, and suddenly I saw this picture of this white werewolf, and it was a picture that took me right back to that moment, because it didn't look at me. It appeared like it was looking at an area down in front of my driver's door. But the head on this white werewolf fits the description almost perfectly, other than the fact that its ears were more down on the side of its head. Like it was, how can I put it? It looked a lot like horses. When horses get angry and they drop their ears back when they're about to let you know who's boss and give you a kick you won't forget. Well, that was very much similar to how this thing looked like. Its ears were down. And it was staring at a patch of ground in front of the door, in front of my front wheel. Its legs were very, very long. I could see that it had nails on its feet. The feet, though, looked odd. They looked like the toes were too long. That's the only way I can describe it, Vic. Sorry, I've got no animals over here that I can compare it to, but it looked like the toes were long. They'd been stretched out. And they had what looked like the nails you'd have on a dog, but the sort of nails, if you let it grow and didn't clip it, where a dog's nail would roll under, I suppose, because they'd curve over. This was almost exaggerated. It was longer and sharpened. First viewing of it, I didn't get to see what the rear looked like because I was just confronted with this head and the back and the feet of this animal. And at the time, that was more than enough for me. Before it did what it did, I was terrified by it, Vic.
Oh, I'm sure you were. What time was it when you had your encounter?
From what I can recall, Vic, this is running through the situation. I've gone through this in my head at the time. I played this over and over again for 4 months, Vic. I couldn't even go back to this car park. But I've run over this again and again in my head, and over the years I've slowly let it drift to the back of my memories. But then after discovering your show, I've come back to visit it, and it's confirmed to me that I feel, after listening to what people described, that what I saw then has a name, to Dogman. But it was about 11 or 10 o'clock. I actually think it's about 10 p.m. Initially I thought it was 11 o'clock at night, Vic. But now I feel it was probably 10 o'clock, because after this, as I'll go on to describe in a bit, that we left the car park and I went to a friend who he owned a pub in Usk, and we went back there because we were so shook up. I had to go and sit down and get myself together. I was in a bit of a state, to be honest with you, Vic. I continued looking at this thing, Vic. I'm trying to figure out in my head now at this point what it is, because what I'm seeing shouldn't exist. As I've already said, Vic, these are thoughts that go through our head. As any person knows, you can have a cluster of thoughts that pass by within a second. So these thoughts are racing through my head. What is it? And as it did that, it started to raise its head up, which is how I had a good look. I noticed its mouth was only open a little bit. I've heard some people describe how they've growled or how they're baring their teeth. Well, in all honesty, I can't say, because it had its mouth open a bit and I could almost make out teeth. But I've got a dog, a husky called Maya, and sometimes when she's sitting, her mouth will open slightly, like she's about to begin panting. The tip of her tongue sticks out, but she doesn't quite start panting. That's what it appeared to do. It's hard for me to put my finger on what it was doing, Vic. It looked very threatening, but I don't know if it was feeling like it wanted to be threatening or if it felt threatened, because I hadn't made eye contact with it, and I don't think it made eye contact with me at this point. I felt that it wasn't aware that I was looking at it. So I'm looking at this thing, and as it raises its head up, it starts sniffing the side of my door. And this then, whilst I was terrified, it went up another level. Inside, I was screaming. I wanted to get out. I didn't look at my girlfriend at this point. I didn't do anything, because much as it was terrifying me, I now understand through the type of job I've done and my work, and you get things like audio exclusion, visual exclusion. You get fixed on a point or on something. There's studies that show, Vic, that when a person or a human being is shown a threat, i.e. a gun points at you, many people say they just looked at the tip of the gun. And that is your instinct, the fight or flight coming in, where you focus on what the threat is. And this is what I was doing, Vic. I was just focused right on this face, thinking, oh my goodness. And it started raising up, and it was now sniffing the door. So I'm thinking, oh my God, is it smelling me? Can it smell my other half? Why is it sniffing the door? And it started to sniffle on the handle. And as I'm sure you can imagine, with every movement and every bit of sniffing that it's done, I'm getting more and more terrified. If it was possible for that to happen, I was getting more and more terrified. So it started sniffing the handle, and I'm thinking, well, this thing's going to look up and notice me in a minute. What am I going to do? And this is all thoughts racing through my head. But it didn't look at me. I don't know why. I don't know what it's doing, but just suddenly turned around. And when it turned, one of the things that I thought, my goodness, that's odd, is when it turned, a dog will move its front legs, almost like its back legs can't move. I don't know if you know how I mean, Vic, but it will move its front legs and just move its feet, the placement of its rear feet. It won't walk around. With this thing, almost like a cat, turned tight on itself, almost like into a U shape, and the back end just came fluid. And even though it was so large, it did all this without any part of it, or from what I could see, exposing itself past the end of my car. So it almost doubled back on itself in a very fluid motion, almost like a snake would. I don't know why. I couldn't hear or see anything. Again, it could have been where I was so terrified, and the audio exclusion that you can get when you're terrified. Sometimes you can lose your hearing because of adrenaline. And I don't know if it was that, but I didn't hear or see anything. And I did look up briefly. And the next thing, then it shot off away from behind the car. If anybody wants to look up where this is, I said this took place in a car park outside Usk Memorial Hall, which is in South Wales. If you came off Usk Maryport Street and looked for Usk Memorial Hall, I think I've given you some pictures, Vic. In the one close-up picture, you'll see there's a Land Rover Discovery outside the hall, a white Land Rover Discovery. Well, that's where I was sat. Then to the rear of where I was sat, probably 50 yards, 60 yards away, was a row of terraced houses. I'm not sure if it's referred to that in America, Vic, but terraced houses is when you have, say, 10 houses and they're all joined together. There's no break in between each house. It's just a row of houses and they're all one long building. So it went off towards this row of terraced houses, and this 50, 60 yards, I can't give you an exact figure, Vic, but it appears to be 50 or 60 yards. It felt like, Vic, one second it was there, the next second it was at the other end of this car park. I've never seen anything cover ground so quickly. I can't recall how many steps it took, because that's one of the things that I just can't recall, because it was so long time ago. I think probably as it was moving, the fear was still there, but it was a slight relief that it was now leaving. but it covered this ground in the blink of an eye. It was unbelievably quick. I've seen whippets, very fast dogs. I've some experience around horses and riding horses, but I've never seen anything move as fast as it did. As it got to the end of this car park, even though it's tarmac and concrete in this car park, the base of it is, there was a lot of chippings and gravel on it as well. If you were looking out of the back of my car, stood outside my car, facing the rear of my car, looking at this row of houses, it ran off to the right-hand side. This row of houses, you've got a right and a left. And in front of these houses, there were probably 8 to 10 cars parked, very much like in the photo that I sent you, Vic. But obviously it was night time. The rest of the car park was empty. But these cars that were parked there were for the residents, the people that live in the houses. They parked their cars in this car park. And if my memory serves me correct, it says reserved for, and whichever house number it is. It's run across to this corner, very quick. And it then took a left, but to me it appeared almost like it was carrying so much speed, it turned left, but the weight of it, because it was a large animal, the weight of it wanted it to keep going. The laws of physics meant that it was going straight on, even though it wanted to turn left. But as it did turn left, I noticed its back legs were skipping out, and rather where a dog would use its front legs to pull in, suddenly it just raised up, Vic. And that's, I can't, I'm a bit stumbling for words even now, Vic. I don't know how to describe how I felt, but I've never seen anything like it. I was scared enough as it was by what I was seeing. But then suddenly this thing is rising up, but it didn't stand upright. It was almost at like a 45-degree angle. It was like it wanted to gain more leverage, so it lifted itself up so it could punch out across the front of this row of cars in between the houses and the cars. But his front legs came right up, and it almost tucked its arms up in only the manner. The only thing that I can think to mind, Vic, that would describe it is in the way that almost like a T-Rex. Its arms suddenly became shortened and it pulled them in tight. And it did this turn and dug right in. And rather than its legs sliding, it just dug in and launched itself across the front of these houses and behind these cars. So I lost sight of it, but I could see some movement. And this was from the street lights. We've got orange street lights over here. And when you have fog, it illuminates the orange, sort of pierces the fog better and illuminates things. And I could see the shadow it moving. And it travelled about halfway across the cars, and then I lost the shadow. And I couldn't see any movement. And I'm thinking, well, it's going to come out the other side any moment. And it didn't come out the other side. So I paused for a moment. I've turned to my other half, and when I turned to see her, she's white as a sheet. And I said, did you just see that? She's gone, yeah, and nodded her head, and that's all she could say. This is someone who's usually quite bubbly and talking, quite a jovial person. She just couldn't talk. She was white as a sheet. And I just said, we got to get out of here. So I started my car, and I had twin Weber carburetors on my Beetle, which mean that even though it was an 1800, it's quite nippy for a Beetle. And I've put this car in reverse, and I floored it. And even when I was young, I was never one of these, what we call UK boy racers. Someone who's, a severe petrol head when they're young, think that they can drive really fast and do anything they want. I wasn't really one of those people. I don't know whether it's because the person that taught me to drive, he was a police instructor, or ex-police instructor, sorry. I don't know whether it's because he taught me to drive, but I had a bit of a good head on me, I would like to think, when I was driving. So usually I wouldn't go anywhere very fast, but I floored it out of this car park. I didn't care. There was gravel spinning everywhere. We were out there like a shot. I pulled out that car park, turned left, back down Maryport Street, and headed toward, there's an area in us, which is almost like a large square with a cenotaph. Now, I don't for cenotaph same. It's basically like a concrete spire that comes out of the ground, and it's to do with World War I and World War II, where people that gave their lives in those wars for Britain, their names are on this memorial, or any persons from Usk that was in World War I and World War II, their names are on this cenotaph. And when we have Armistice Day and Memorial Days, they're remembered. So this is in the centre of the square, and this square is mostly made up of pubs. From one side of the square to the other, it's probably, again, 50, 60 yards. So I've raced over to this pub, which at the time was called the Castle Inn. We've parked up, and we've paused for a second, and I've turned round to my ex, and I've said, what are we going to say? What are we going to do? And she just said, don't say anything. Just don't mention it. Let's just go in and have a drink. And so we've gone in there, and we kept it to ourselves. People noticed, said, what's the matter? You look like you're rattled by something. One or two people thought, oh, they've had a row, even though we were quite renowned. We didn't row. We got on very well. She was my other half at the time. She was also my best friend. Or I'd refer to my best friend. We weren't friends before we started going out, but she was almost like my best friend. And we just kept it to ourselves, Vic. And After that, I didn't go anywhere near that car park. That was always our meet-up point every night or any time we were going out. As I said previously, we didn't have to make phone calls to each other. We just knew that everyone would turn up within an hour of you getting there, be it just before the pubs opened or just before the pubs were starting to close around about 10 or 11 o'clock. We'd always meet there, but I couldn't go anywhere near there. And I never heard any grumbling from my girlfriend at the time. She also wouldn't go anywhere near there. For the purposes, I've been back there once or twice. And every time I've gone there, Vic, it's almost like I'm back in the moment. I've had that dump of adrenaline and that horrible feeling. I haven't expected to see anything, but it's just that memory coming back, and it puts the pulse up and you start feeling the adrenaline again. That was pretty much it, Vic. I don't know what to say really, Vic, after that. You know, there's some more details, like I said, about the animal that I just, at the time, I didn't know what it was, other than a werewolf. I'd seen things in Hollywood, but common sense tells you werewolves don't exist.
Well, that was the last encounter for tonight's show. Thanks as always so much for listening, everyone. Have a great night. If you've had a Dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you.